North Korea was missing.
Yeah.
I didn't
Well,
realize
I wouldn't
that
mind somebody other than Ralph
Taiwan
Lauren.
is always Chinese
it.
Taipei. I
So
understand.
the meeting is
that they
being
were
recorded at this
in
point, and it
English.
is
I
going to
didn't
pick up
realize that
everything
was
that
like
you say.
an agreement with
Okay.
the IOC. Russia apparently still can't send athletes.
And the funny
It would be a shame if
thing
the public knew that I was
The
disapproving of Ralph Lauren's Olympic outfits.
Yes.
Ooh, this makes sure like just not looking good now.
So I have the other half of it to watch today.
Did my third job.
Yeah, I'm all about the parade of
Thank you.
nations. Like the rest
All
of the
right.
Olympics, it's fun. They play
So what was
sports,
your
they do
favorite
stuff.
outfit last night?
I don't know. I was a little bit disappointed with the Americans.
I think we need to get rid of Ralph Lauren.
I'm gonna have to go.
We're,
back.
we're not at a yacht club, we're at the Olympics. Let's call the meeting to order. So. So we were called to order at
9:06.
9:06. All right, and the roll call is Sarah. Will you-
Can I ask for one clarifying question?
You'll have to unmute your microphone, Sarah.
She is unmuted.
I'm
She is.
unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
All right, I will run through the roll call while we sort that out. Sarah Glavin, wave.
I'm not muted.
Here.
Can you, am I muted?
Garima.
Here.
Kelly,
Here.
Virginia,
Here.
Ted,
Here.
Suzanne.
Here.
Excellent. All present. Public comments. None. Review of next item, review our 2021 strategic plan and anti-racism strategic plan. Strategic priorities, engagement, learning, stewardship, anti-racism, A and B objectives. We'll give a chance to.
I'm not sure why we can't hear her.
You can hear us though, right, Sarah? Okay.
Sorry about that. Well, but I want to,
Yeah, let's.
yeah, we can see your chat too, Sarah. All right,
Yeah.
let me just try one thing here, and then if that doesn't work, then I'm gonna get Emmanuel.
We just won't fly United.
Tell me what's going on.
Could you hear her before you put her up there?
Pardon me.
Could you hear her before you
No.
put her up there? No.
Try now, Sarah.
Can you hear me now?
No. Okay. Do you mind if I
No, go ahead.
get?
I missed you guys.
Yes.
I assume. It's been 2 meetings. Yeah. I was like, I think you. Collective. I missed the library. Yeah, Miss Rita too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm assuming she had something to do with the coffee behind us.
No, that was David.
Oh.
Yeah. There's donuts and they're making such a loud noise telling me to come and get one.
I think just to shut it up.
I think I need to shut up.
I almost was gonna stop at the
Do you go by
farmer's market to
Susanna?
get Suzanne.
Suzanne.
Do you know why your mason jar and your ball jar is blue?
I do not. And the lid is
These-
Wait, the what? Indiana?
It's actually, when it gets fired up, is that color.
cool.
So the ball company in Indiana almost destroyed some of the Indiana dunes to make that blue.
Classic.
So drink guiltily.
It does say made in the USA. Yeah. I actually don't know where this came from. I like how
Sarah, I have someone from IT on their way down. They'll figure it out for us.
Ted tells you to drink with guilt and I'm like, yes, with my disposable cup.
So Sarah says we can get started, but you guys finish getting your coffee and donuts, and please eat the donuts.
You don't want to take any home, is that?
If you
what
want. No, well, I wouldn't. I'd leave it here for them. For sure. Okay, so this is your meeting to help us figure out what both our strategic plan and our budget together should look like going into 2022. So as I've told some of you, this is the busiest time of year. But the only issue we're having is that Sarah Glavin, one of the trustees, she's participating by Zoom. She's unmuted her microphone, but we still can't hear. We still can't hear. I'm not sure what to do about that. So Emmanuel will figure that out. So, I mean, my objective here for this meeting is to come away from this meeting with a better understanding of what the board members' priorities are for both our strategic priorities and objectives and for the budget. Because this is, again, really the busiest time of the year for both the administrative team, the leadership team, and all of you, because this is the time of year that we need to put the budget together for the next fiscal year. And to make those decisions regarding what your expectations will be for revenue and for expenditures, we also then, of course, need to figure out what your priorities are for the strategic plan. The way that we've done the budget over the last few years, and especially for you, Marina, if she wants to give it a shot. Can we hear you now, Sarah?
I'm not sure. Can you?
Yes. So what-
So there are the options in the microphone menu. You just have to.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sarah.
I was laughing that I thought maybe my husband taught you a trick that he'd been trying for a long time.
Do that again.
A husband would never do such a thing.
First option. Okay. All right, thank you, Emmanuel.
How do I invite Sarah but not let her speak?
All right, so where was I? Right, so the way we've done the budget for the past few years is a gradual process over the summer and fall before we have to adopt a budget in October to send to the village. I think Marima and Susan, I think Jeremy was explained to you a few weeks ago that the Village of Oak Park needs to place our budget, the library's budget, and the library's levy request into its ordinances. And statutorily, we need to get that to them within a certain number of days before the end of the fiscal year. So typically it's by October that we need to adopt a budget. So we start in July and August, talking about the strategic plan, talking about very general expectations for revenue and expenditures. And then we come to the board in August with a very first early draft of what those expenditure and revenue projections might look like. You have a conversation about your comfort level with the way that's looking. And we talk about really the one principal expenditure that we have that's over 70% of our expenditures, which is human resources, wages, salaries, benefits, staff education. And then once the board is feeling comfortable with the way those numbers are looking, then we come back in September with a lot more detail about expenditures and all of the other areas, collections, facilities, insurance, and all the other administrative expenses. And then we have another conversation. The board gives us some more guidance on how comfortable it's feeling with those numbers. And then we come back with another draft in October, and hopefully by then we're ready to adopt a budget. But today really is just kind of start that whole process off. And I would say that what makes this year different than previous years is that this is the first year that we have an anti-racism strategic plan, and with its own set of priorities and objectives. And that will, or should, I think, inform to a large degree what your priorities are for the library moving forward. And all of those priorities for the strategic plan, of course, then affect our budget, both revenue and expenditures. So again, my objective today, and hopefully you share that, or you can tell me how you'd like this meeting really to go, is to have a very general conversation, start with what are we looking at now? What do our plans look like now? What does our budget look like now? And then talk about, you know, whether you think that those priorities and those objectives are still the things that we should be focused on, and how that then it both affects or is affected by our budget expectations. And you know, and again, I would say a big part of that is determining what, if any, objective you have regarding the levy request. Because again, as you know, well over 95% of all the revenue that the library has each year to operate comes from local real estate taxes. And so any decision that you make about the levy then has a big impact on the revenue, because very little comes from any other sources. And when we look at, I both included here in this just a few pieces of paper for you. The last couple of pages is what the budget and budget projections generally look like. So you'll be able to, when we get there, you'll be able to see some of the numbers, what we're talking about. So anyway, that I just wanted to sort of like lay the groundwork for what I think today should be about or needs to be about. But again, it's your meeting, and there'll be plenty of time for your questions, or you know, or for you to guide the conversation really in any direction you want it to go. So does that all make sense?
It does. Can I ask some questions to sort of start off?
Sure.
I know you mentioned sort of talking about like looking at the way things are right now and then going from there.
Yeah.
Can I politely ask that we do the inverse and we talk about things that we think are going to change?
Sure.
Because I know there were a lot of things that changed during COVID that we weren't expecting to change.
Sure.
And I'd like us to talk about if we're moving that unintentional part of how things are forward, or like, are we considering those things the way things are now, or are we looking at how we planned for 2020 into 2021 to go? Because the last time we kind of looked at a budget in that way was pre-COVID. So can we talk about some of the things that changed in that time period and whether or not we'd like to keep those changes? And then can we also talk about other things we know that are coming? I'm mostly talking about the Antiracism Board. I know that there's some money that's going to go into that I'm assuming is going to be rolled into that 75%. Hiring a new person, possibly adding financial contributions to people who are doing affinity groups and leadership roles within there. Can we talk about some of those things so we know what we're trying to kind of squunch in to that 75%?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
No, of course. Anybody else?
And I'd like to point out to Suzanne that one of the things that surprised me when I first came on the board is that 95% of our budget comes from the tax levy. So we don't have a fundraising entity here and all the stuff. And that tax levy is also something that in the past, when the village people said, let's try to figure out how to save money. No, the tax levy is there, it's set. There's not much we can do about that. And of course, we've talked about fundraising and all of those things, but it's the human resources, a big part of the money, and most of the money that comes in is a tax levy. And that's pretty simple at this point.
Yeah, yes, because right there, as I said, there's really just that one primary source of revenue. All the others together, grants, donations, other things, interest, they barely equal a few percentages points of our overall revenue. Anybody else?
The question I have about the anti-racism strategic plan, is this like the sum total of it that we have in front of us, or is there something else that I haven't seen?
There is, so this is what you're looking at are all of the goals and objectives. Then there's also an action plan that goes along with this. That's not in here. And that's what the anti-racism advisory team has been going over for some months now to figure out what recommendations it wanted to make regarding resource allocations.
So Suzanne, that's kind of what I was talking about when I said, let's talk about
Yeah.
what kind of money from implementing those things we want to dedicate, because there has been talk of, you know, obviously hiring a new director, but also things like, if we're asking people of color to shoulder extra while they're at work, are we taking things out of their current work? Does that mean we then have to hire someone else to take that over? Or are we adding a financial incentive? You know,
Important.
how does all of that work? And if we're sitting down and looking at a budget, that board, that group of people needs to know, you know, what they have to work with and what we as a board are willing to allow them to use as resources as they start to put this together.
Thank you.
And yeah, and to be clear, when you're looking at the strategic plan of the original 3 priorities, engagement, learning, and stewardship, there's a whole action plan that undergirds this too, and you're not seeing that either. Because when we adopt a strategic plan, the board is generally adopting priorities and general objectives, and then it's the staff's responsibility to figure out what actually has to happen to achieve all of those things.
Great, thank you.
David, I've got a couple of quick questions about the anti-racism strategic plan, if you're along with what Virginia's talked about. When questions come from the community, where do we direct those questions? Because I mean, we will have a director whenever that person comes.
Yeah.
And I would assume that that's where the questions would go, because I can't answer from I have my own opinions, but I can't answer for the board. And
So if someone is asking you to
what are we doing? And as we look to the benchmarks, I mean, we will be getting these monthly reports, implementation, I got that.
Yeah.
But just as a board member, I can't, or I shouldn't speak directly to staff when I have a problem. I go through you.
Yeah. And I would say you should continue to
go through you.
Yeah.
And then you direct that to your leadership.
because
team.
when we hire a director of equity and anti-racism, that person will be a director and a part of the leadership team. So that person will be working together with me and with all of the other directors. So just like you would, if someone had a question that you weren't sure which other director would be the most appropriate person to answer that, you would just have me, and then I would talk with them. I would suggest that you just keep doing that.
Thank you. And could you just very quickly outline how the advisory team made up of the stakeholders was conceived? How large is it? You know,
Yeah, sure.
What is it?
Sure. And you find, I mean, and you can find all the names of the individuals on our website. And it's changed even in the relatively short amount of time. There were people that were on the team that, decided that they didn't have the time, and so they transitioned off. But really, we put it together first by recommending staff members and board members, and then to be a part of that team. So we have several of those. Virginia's on that team. I'm on that team. Erin Alonso, Sarah Yale, Stephen Jackson, and Rashida Graham Washington helped us to identify members of the community to be a part of that team. And so now, with her help, we have Orson is his name, Orson, and Chibike, who's on the village board. So we have several community members that are a part of that too.
And that's of course on the website. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
I know
So
it's-
I would say now if we include Rashida and Daryl Washington, her husband and partner, 9 people, I think. Is the total.
Yeah, and I know other people have shown up, or they've chimed in to give expertise on specific things.
Right, we routinely have Jody Colo there because a big part of the action plan is communications, and so we've needed to have her a part of those meetings, and we've invited others to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, does that help? Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so then if you'd like to, sort of, as you said, Virginia, start the conversation from, where do we want to go rather than where we are now? How would you like to start? You have some other questions you want to ask, or what would you like to hear me sort of talk about next?
I think that the two things that come to mind, and I'm sure other people at the table will have other ideas as well. I wanted to talk about some of the financial shift from physical materials and circulation to some of the digital items. I know before we talked about increasing digital access came at a financial cost. Are we seeing that as something that we want to keep, or do we want to dip back down to something closer to pre-COVID levels? Same along the lines as, you know, supporting D97 and D200, you know, our kids coming here to, you know, get materials, get hotspots and things like that. Do we need to drop that back closer to pre-COVID levels, or is that something that we want to, you know, kind of keep those inverted? And then the second piece I wanted to talk about was how are we folding in the financial cost of the anti-racism initiatives into our staffing costs?
Sure. So I would say, I might not be able to answer all of the specific questions or get at all of the minutia that you might want today, but we'll have lots of time to get at that over the next few months. But generally, I would say, first about collections, is that, so there's let me differentiate between the expenses for digital or virtual collections and then expenses for equipment, because they're not, we try to separate the cost of things that we circulate for patrons to use technology from the expenses of the collections themselves. So we do have different money that we budget for purchasing those kinds of items, and then the money that we use to purchase digital or virtual collections. I would say that I don't see us reducing what we're currently expending on either collections or the devices and the tech and the physical technology. In fact, I would see us probably gradually needing to even increase that, because I don't, you know, I hate the expression, but there's no putting that genie back in the bottle.
Okay.
Because people realize that there is a lot of benefit in being able to use our collections in many different ways and taking, if you will, the library with them. And so what we've done for the community regarding the circulation of devices, laptops, other mobile devices, hotspots, projectors, the demand for that I don't see even after the pandemic is really over, decreasing.
Okay.
So I would say right now I feel comfortable saying it's either, you know, going to be continuing to expend what we've come to get used to expending during the pandemic, or even perhaps as the need for that access to that kind of technology grows, even expending perhaps more. Because I think one of the things that I think we've learned is that that is one way that the library can really help to bridge a divide in the community between those who have all of the access to the technology that they need and those who don't, is for the library to be able to provide that access. I mean, hotspots is a great example of that. And access to other technology that people can circulate and take with them is you know, those are great examples of that. And, you know, until the village as a whole, and we've had this conversation, decides that it wants to prioritize essentially village-wide or universal broadband access for everyone who steps foot in the village, until that's a priority, there's both a limited amount that the library can do, but there is something that the library can continue to do. So, you know, I don't see us necessarily decreasing what we're spending on that. If anything, I would see it going up. And then regarding digital collections, you know, again, I would say the same thing, that I think people want physical materials. We're not going to stop purchasing physical materials. That is always going to be, I mean, again, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and for 30 years, people have been predicting the end of the printed word, and that's not happening. It's never, I don't think it's ever going to happen. So, we're not going to stop doing that. But, clearly we have adjusted over the years from print to digital as more and more things just are no longer available in physical format, right? I mean, for instance, we used to have shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves of printed reference materials. Most of that just doesn't exist anymore. It's only available digitally. So, I don't know what my staff's recommendations right now are. Our manager of collections or our director of services and programs are regarding what they think about the the actual breakdown of that budget. But I know that I can, they'll share that information with me and with you when we ask them. But I don't see, again, any of that being reduced, going back to the level, whatever that level was before the pandemic. People, this is an expectation and a need that people have for digital materials, and that's not gonna decrease.
So I have a couple of questions about that. One is that, of course, we've gotten some, I guess, complaints recently from maybe older patrons saying that as we invest more into digital collections, obviously there is maybe a population that we're leaving behind. So I don't know, I don't have an answer to that yet, but I'm just wondering how we balance that. And the other thing is that I really appreciate you talking about like the gap between people who have access to the technologies and not, and here's a place that the library can step in. And I know that we probably can't just bring universal broadband access into the village ourselves. But I would like to point out that without that, we might be in fact contributing to the gap, so that if we're investing in technologies and digital materials, but not stepping up the pressure for the infrastructure, then again, like outside of hotspots, when people bring devices home, there's only so much that they can do if they don't already have access to the high-speed internet. So I think that the devices and collections, I think, are really important for bridging that gap, but so is the pressure on the infrastructure. So
I mean, that's a very strategic issue.
yes,
Like what-
right. So how do we make? Thank you. So how do we make that happen? Like how do we so obviously, are you in iGov? So that's one venue, but there must be other ways that we can, or do we just wait for the village? Can we
I think
storm
that-
their meetings? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I want to be very diplomatic and say that I think with some changes in administration and leadership, that there might be more receptive ears to those kinds of messages that I don't think were necessarily there or have been there in the 8 years that I've been here. Because when some of us have attempted to have some of those conversations, they haven't gone anywhere. It was clear that they weren't necessarily priorities. But I think that now, if we want, through COG, Council of Governments, or through iGov, to start maybe pushing from the library's perspective those kinds of conversations, because I think that's really where one of the places that it absolutely has to happen. Then I think that that those conversations now we might have a chance of advancing some of that.
I think the other thing we have now that was not there before when addressing this more widely is we now have a year, 15, 18 months worth of data of who does have that access, who does have that technology, who doesn't, and how did that impact their ability to have and keep a job, their ability to let their kid go to school and be successful. We will now have, we can go to D200 and say, okay, who were the kids who didn't have that access? What did that look like to, for them?
Yeah.
And so we have that actual information instead of sort of like well, we think this is what might be happening, or like anecdotal evidence of, you know, you stop in a coffee shop and somebody says, hey, thanks for the hotspot because da 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 da. I think now, like David said, with new people in, you know, several of the different governing bodies in Oak Park, and having this additional hard data on the impact of access to technology for the people in the village, that we'll be able to sort of help make a case for, you know, here are the things that we did as the library. I know David can attest to me annoying him for like a good 4 months about how far can we make the Wi-Fi extend outside the building into the park? Can we put like a porta potty in the middle of Scoville Park and like put like anything, you know?
Yeah.
There were a lot of things that people and, you know, the staff in this building, a lot of hoops they tried to jump through
Right.
to make that happen, you know, and now we'll have.
Well, and that conversation led us to hotspots.
Yeah.
me
Well, and
annoying you on a regular
I'd be happy
basis.
to take it to IGov. I would want to have information from us.
Oh, yeah.
On
Mhm.
where is the gap in terms of need? What is the library currently meeting and the space in between?
I'd also like to know about the cost. What is the cost that's resting on the library that could be better allocated and better shifted? Is there a cost savings across the electorate if this is something that the village does or that we do wholeheartedly offering broadband versus us offering hotspots, tracking them, putting them in circulation, repairing them, you know, all the things that go with that technology. You know, cost is one of the things that we are all constantly asked about as board members. Is there an argument for saying, hey, we can, you know, something better can be provided, something more equitable can be provided, and by the way, it will cost you less money. That might bring over the last few people who are not worried about the first 2 bullet points.
So that's really interesting. And and David, when Suzanne and I met with him and Jeremy, I think was it just last week?
The
Time
days,
is
flying to me.
the days are flowing.
Time is an infinite loop.
A week or 2 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah. But we were sort of a little bit talking about this, and I'm just, yeah, I think that what, you know, we have this, the American Recovery Act, some of these funds that are coming to the village, right? And it seems to me legitimately that if we agree, you know, and I think we agree that there's no reason for universal broadband access to not be a good idea for our village, that would be really great for the recovery of our village, you know, like to, and you're right about, I'm also trying to think about people, you know, who maybe don't have kids in school, who may be affected, but I don't know where they would come up, like which.
Who do they come to talk to about?
Yes, exactly. Like where do we see those people who are,
Mhm.
I mean, though it does seem sometimes that everybody in Oak Park has like 2.7 children or something like that, but I know that obviously that's not true. There are people, you know, but if it's not true, Suzanne. So, but if they're not, if it's not like an immediate need that they sense because of their kids, and you know, that the district might, the district 97 or 200 might represent their interests, like where would we see those people, right? So I don't know that we need all the numbers to get the conversation started, because surely if we want this to be truly cross all the taxing bodies, then they would bring their own numbers.
Well, I don't think we'll have all the numbers, but I think the library is in a unique perspective to take a look at, you know, here's what things look like pre-pandemic. Here are some of the things that we did. Here's, you know, some of the impact that we saw or that we're hearing. We can at least take that to the table and say, you know, does anybody else have anything similar? Or did you have to make similar adjustments for even your own employees?
Right.
I think it's just a matter of, now that I don't want to like tempt fate and be like, now that we're all in a position where we can think more than 48 hours ahead, but now that we're in a position where we're not, you know, constantly scrambling to figure things out, can we learn a little bit from what we've done over the past year and try to make post-COVID, new normal, whatever you want to call it, a little bit better moving forward?
Yeah.
Based off of that.
I was gonna say, and I was just reminded of this a few weeks ago as part of like the data piece. D97 sent out a survey about, I believe it was related to like federal funds that they were gonna be getting, that they were anticipating to get about technology gaps. And was in part, and some of the questions were about digital device ownership at home that would be accessible, that provides access for kids to be able to do their schoolwork. That if we could ask that D97 what that information was, that they got in the, I don't remember providing too much personal information, if any, in that. Colleen, I'm sure you got that, and Sarah too, because I don't know if you're in 97 yet. Or,
Yeah.
But that was, I saw that and I thought, as part of this conversation, as we're looking at what that gap is and where those pieces, that could be a helpful piece of data. Because I'm trying to remember everything that was asked in that form that we got, but that might be something we could get from 97, or it can be, it can be discussed because it's recent. It was people, and they were asking that question of like, do you have technology at home that would allow your kids to participate in the schoolwork as we had just been doing this past school year?
Is there data that I can provide to at our next SAGO meeting around this issue? Like how many hotspots do we, like, is there some data that we could present to them and if I ask to be on the agenda for
Sure.
this?
Could you, can you sort of articulate for me what numbers you think you'd like to have, and then I can get the
Okay, great.
Generate those questions.
And in full disclosure, I don't know if anyone's been attending or been able to attend recent D97 meetings, but the note that you're referring to, Matt, came out on June 21st. Well, actually, yeah, it dropped to us on June 21st. It was called the D97 Technology Survey. And they commented that they were planning to discuss in an upcoming board meeting. I don't know if we could look at the minutes of the July meeting to see what was included, but it was a 1-minute survey. So I think to your point, the data is pretty fine. Like there's not it's not an in-depth survey. But it does refer to this kind of combined emergency connectivity fund program. So not to say we shouldn't get into the mix. The program outlines that it is made available for schools and libraries to solve for digital divide connectivity. But I think to your point, I think Virginia, if we could have a call with D97 leadership, or David, if you could connect with the administration just to kind of find out what's their position. Because if they're already quarterbacking this, I think we think about how our strategic plan maybe aligns to that initiative, but then we're not kind of treating it in isolation.
I agree. I also think that might help instead of doing like piecemeal efforts, which end up actually not, like if there was a concerted, centralized conversation, and then we figured out what the individual taxing bodies could do, towards that would be more equitable.
Yeah, because it's, if people are trying to track down, I think a lesson we could take is the vaccine efforts. It's like, okay, who has it? Where is it? How do what list do I have to get on? Where do I have to go? And there was not a good centralized portal of information. It was so decentralized that the access was there, but the work to get that access was cumbersome. So,
And there was definitely an huge
Yes.
equity racism aspect to that. So I'm wondering if,
people not familiar with the process who aren't used to participating in those efforts found it extra difficult.
right, but it wasn't even like from that viewpoint, it was also people with privilege having all of the resources and access, and then choosing to go and get vaccines in neighborhoods that were people who were hardest hit. I was on there was a Facebook group and I was part of that, and it was just horrific to watch. And I kept trying to comment, and it's like whack-a-mole. So I'm wondering if there's a way for our participation in the idea of broadband and access, and this to be part of the anti-racism like, does that fit into the anti-racism strategic plan? Is there a way to, so that the anti-racism strategic plan is still
Yeah.
the priority?
Well, it does, I would say it
Like,
does.
and
in
how do we
terms-
connect with the other
Well,
governing?
Yeah, no, it does in terms of making decisions about the allocation of resources. So, when the Anti-Racism Advisory Team met just a couple of weeks ago, a lot of the conversation they had that I asked them to have was about this very thing. The Board of Trustees now is going into the busiest time of the year for it. It's going to be preparing the budget for next year. Everything that they're going to be talking about is going to be or needs to be focused on the priorities of the anti-racism strategic plan. And what do you, the members of the advisory team, think about how they should be focused on the allocation of resources when it comes to the most important priorities here? And again, I would say that what they really talked about the most was continuing to allocate resources to continue to make progress on wage and salary equity, making sure that staff are properly compensated, making sure that they have access to funds to continue learning and education. That what I heard many of them say was that was the most important thing to continue to do regarding allocation of resources. There wasn't much of a conversation about technology per se, but again, that's still, if that is something that this board wants to focus on too, regarding something it thinks it can really have an impact or an effect on equity, then that's exactly what you should be talking about. What should inform how we put a budget together, right? Does that make sense?
I have just a minor question about physical materials and COVID. We went fine-free,
Yes.
3 years ago?
Yeah, 4 actually.
Have we found that our physical materials, are the shelves empty because people are basically hoarding the material at home because they don't have a fine?
No.
Yeah, good.
Absolutely not. In
Good.
fact, people are more inclined to bring things back. In other words, most people, the great majority of people, were always returning their things on time. So there's this idea that people have, like, the only reason people bring things back is because they're threatened with a fine. No, that's not, has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, that's great.
Ever had anything
Yeah.
overdue? It's like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
And
most.
you've done a wonderful job, because I looked
Yeah.
on my piano where I keep the library books, and I go, okay, I know I'm not going to be fined for this, but I'm getting constant emails to say,
Right,
You know?
exactly. And again, because people aren't worried about a fine that they might have to pay, there's no anxiety. It's like, yeah, oh, great, I can bring this back, and even though it might be a few days late, it's fine, and I can, so no, that's not a problem.
so the shelves are not empty over.
Because of that.
It's not like toilet paper.
Yeah, there's no,
I
There's
talked
no
to,
run on library books.
I talked to somebody at one of the Chicago libraries when they started going fine-free. And they said they started getting things back more because
Yes.
people were just keeping them to avoid the fine. Like, if I take it back, I have to give
I'm
them
gonna get yelled at
$2.
at the desk.
If I
Yeah.
keep it, I don't have to pay any
Deal with
money.
this. I don't have to deal
So
with this.
funny story, like my first interaction with, first main interaction with the Oak Park Public Library when we moved here. We had borrowed a DVD, and my then husband forgot that we had it until we moved, and we found it, and we brought it back shamefaced. And somebody at the desk politely told us that the fine was $150 something. And like, after we almost passed out and she picked us up off the floor, she laughed really hard. I guess we were switching to fine free at that point, and was like, well, I'll just make that go away just this one. But like the amount of like talking that we did about, okay, we're gonna have to look at our budget because we know this is not gonna be, this is the most expensive DVD in the history of the world to take back. And I know that, I was in a position I could do that, but I can understand how people would just say, I took out 10 books and they are all now 10 days late, and I guess now I own 10 new books, because the tax of taking it back was just too much. So I think fine free will actually end up getting more of our
And
stuff
that's-
back.
I recall a few years ago that before the Chicago Public Library did an Amnesty Day, and the amount of stuff that they had gotten back was staggering. I can't remember what the book was, but like the number of like old
Yeah.
books.
1964.
Oh,
Yeah.
I got like back like some first edition of something from like, like that, there was like, oh no, this one is going like in a special collection, like temperature control place. It was like someone's like, it was like in someone's grandparents' house and stuff, and it was like, but yeah, the amount of stuff they got back from an Amnesty Day was huge. So I think that it's David's point, it's like we're not hurting for the materials and stuff, and if anything, it's been.
Well, I mean, really important part there, I would say, is that, that's an example of the library prioritizing equity before we were saying that that's what we were doing. I mean, then what we were saying was, this is a regressive method of raising revenue. This mostly impacts people who can least afford it. If you can't afford it and you're not bringing things back, that also means you're not going to be able to use your library card because it's going to be blocked. So, I mean, those were the things we were saying. So, I mean, that was our, the organization's commitment even before we were saying that this is what we're committed to. So,
My question was not about the whole fine free. I think that's worked beautifully.
Yeah,
It's just like thinking, has the library emptied out because of COVID? That's. the
Well, I
physical
tried,
stuff.
Ted, but I didn't have a bag big enough to take. So,
The other thing about the fine free is also it's not punitive. So, it's not like tying into other systems and structures that
Right.
are problematic.
David, I had a couple of things. I don't know if
Go ahead.
you guys are, so as we think about kind of the current strategic plan, one of the things that was highly discussed in advance of COVID was the outreach strategy. And you very recently brought on some new team members that were hyper focused on really identifying across the village who are individuals who don't feel like they can, either based on access issues or priorities in their family or work dynamics, get to the library facilities, and kind of what do we do to reduce barriers for bringing library services out into the community, into some of these spaces. And that was really ramping up, unfortunately, right as everything was closing. So I don't feel like I've tracked closely with that team in recent months to understand, as we're now getting into, I wouldn't say a better time, but a new time in ways we can think about those access issues and making sure we're bringing services to those who kind of at least can have the flexibility to be in our buildings. Is that something that we feel like is right now kind of well positioned within the strategic plan, or something that we need to revisit as a board to talk about kind of what our expectations are for that role we play in the community?
Well, I think it's continuing to be prioritized. I mean, when you look at, for instance, the strategic priorities report in your board packet for this month, you'll see a lot of information there about the teams that you're talking about, and the ways that they're continuing to bring services out, including delivery services, and all of that. I would say is our plan is to continue that, again, even in a post-pandemic environment. But that doesn't mean that we can't still continue to talk about how much more of a priority do we want that to be, and if it is, then what exactly do we mean by bringing programs and services out into the community? What does that look like in terms of physical connection or engagement, or virtual connection or engagement? But again, I don't see us, even as we return to physical spaces, we're hoping, our expectation, as long as things don't get any worse, that all these physical spaces are going to be reopened again after Labor Day. We'll start having in-person programs again. Community members can start reserving our spaces again, like this one that we're in. But I see us at the same time continuing to do a lot of the virtual and digital things that we've been doing, that people have discovered are such a useful thing to have, even when you can gather physically. So I mean, I think there are a lot of ways to think about how are we bringing services out into the community, and we're doing many of those physically, and we'll start doing a lot more of that again. But you know, it's a multifaceted conversation, I guess.
There's a wonderful article in this month's AARP monthly magazine about a book bike in Portland, Oregon. And it is a really good article and about people that this woman who runs the book bike, it's not through the public library, she's actually doing it through a local university, but she speaks about the people who live outside. And I recommend it. Those of you who are over 50, you should be members of AARP.
There is no minimum age to join.
Is that right?
Yeah, you do not have to be of a certain age
They
to
wanna
join
get you
AARP.
Right.
But
You know,
they get you.
I think I refresh my memory if I didn't, because I think I shared with all of you after the last board meeting the quarterly reports that we've been providing to the state library for the Books Empower grant. Did I send all those to you?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I mean, again, that's another example of one example of bringing services out into the community, making sure that resources get into the hands of community members where they are, identifying community members who might not have the access that other people have. So, you know, again, there are a lot of different ways to have this kind of conversation.
So when Sarah is talking about outreach
Mhm.
and then you're talking about bringing the library out, are those the
Yeah.
same thing or is there another
Yeah,
aspect?
no,
of
I
outreach?
would, yeah. I mean, again, it can be different things. I mean, there's outreach in terms of, you know, making sure that the community knows and understands all the services that we're providing. And then there is, you know, what we call community engagement or community services, where we are, or neighborhood services, where we're, you know, physically going out to different places, either with our book bike or by going into other organizations in the communities like schools or parks to either provide services ourselves or to participate in different ways in the services that those agencies are providing. I mean, you know, in the years that I've been here, every year we've done more and more and more of those kinds of things.
Sort of to what Sarah was talking about, saying we kind of talked about outreach. I know we talked about lots of different ways to sort of use the old book bike-ish model to go other places. We talked about that a lot pre-COVID. And I know I had talked to Sarah Yale a little bit about reaching out to Housing Forward, which at the time was a roaming emergency shelter. It looks like now they will have a physical shelter site for clients in one place moving forward.
Their model has completely transformed.
Yeah, having access to the right in over, they saw a lot of really positive change. I'd like to see if that's something our outreach team can help with. I know Housing Forward works a lot with job readiness and resumes and which is why they're called Housing Forward. But I think it makes it a little bit more feasible for us to provide things like, you know, physical materials, books, get them registered for a library card. Yeah, it makes it a little bit easier with having one single stable facility now in Oak Park that they'll be using regularly.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a site captain, that was one of the things that when people brought in and donated books, we had somebody who worked at another library who volunteered with us, and she would bring in books, and like 15 minutes, all of them were gone. I think it's a huge opportunity for outreach, not just because we can provide that bit of comfort and bit of dignity, but also show an especially at-risk population that there are resources here and that they're wanted here and that we want to provide those resources. So if we can go into their space and provide a little avenue that way, I think maybe the big C-19 reset made that a little bit easier for us to do.
And a little bug in the ear for IGov a couple of years ago when there was all this talk about they have a rec center, all this stuff, and I think it's coming now through the Park District again.
It's on my
One
list,
of the issues was to have a library presence in this rec center to be, and I think I haven't heard about that in the last year or two.
The last thing I heard was like there were like using the rec center was a pay situation of some sort, and so we were going to be limited in what we could put where because we provide our services for free.
And that's always been one of David's bugaboos that.
Well, yes, and yes.
Yes.
Yes, and yes. Yeah, no, when a couple of years ago, when all of the funds were essentially being raised by the park district and they were trying to figure out the whole, free versus fee-based spaces and services. Some of you, well, definitely you, Madarima, and you, Suzanne, were not on the board then. I can't remember if you were, Virginia. But the park district came to us and said, we would, do you want to partner with us? Do you want to have a dedicated space? If so, basically, here's how much money you have to give us to build this building. And our response was, no, thank you.
We respectfully decline.
Just a little institutional memory.
We respectfully decline.
It's very diplomatic. I like that. They haven't provided an updated AgGov in quite some time because of the pandemic, but they have acquired the land and they have a significant portion, I think, if not close to all.
Oh, yeah, they're moving
forward.
Oh,
Yeah,
for sure.
and I was not on the board when they presented, so, but
Okay.
yeah.
I couldn't remember how many of you, Matt. you
They
were
do
there,
intend
Ted, you were there,
to
but-
have community rooms that you could reserve for like your Girl Scout troop meeting or something like that. But I think that the model is still fee-based.
Can I ask, I actually don't know, so our libraries, book bikes, are they out right now? Like, are we doing that yet?
We're not yet doing that.
We assume that after Labor Day, that's the kind of stuff.
Yes,
that'll-
right. Yeah, as long as then the weather,
Yeah,
permits us to do
sure.
that, yeah.
And I'm just wondering, because I know.
We are doing home deliveries, however. We
Okay.
are still delivering materials to people.
I was just wondering because of the, it's also block party season.
Yeah.
Right,
so
and we would often be invited to participate in those too.
Yeah, my block is all over me trying to get it. So you can get the book bike. I'm like,
Not
I don't
yet.
think so. It works out.
Hook us up.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna hesitate for a moment and say, I do not think that book bike is going out right now. But yeah, I don't think it's going out right now. Have you seen it out, Matt?
I thought I saw it,
Did you?
but it could have been a training ride. I mean, it didn't, I don't think there was anything going on in the area where I saw it. So I just chalked it up to the stat because there was somebody else pacing it with another bike. So I thought it may have been like orienting a staff, because I remember staff has told us it is not something you just hop on and start riding. It takes some getting used to steering and managing.
Books are heavy.
I had
Books
not
are
even
heavy.
thought about that.
So I saw it and I just assumed that they were getting ready, bringing us, training a staff member to get ready for it.
We're planning a safe, scaled back book bike season in 2021. Unfortunately, we're not able to offer visits to block parties at this time.
Yeah, no
But
bouncy
there's-
houses
Your
either.
point about the books being on in 15 minutes. This article in AARP, this is another aside. If I give too many asides, let me know. But this article in AARP, the Portland book bike that this woman is doing, one of the patrons comes up and says, "How can you do a book bike if you don't have P.G. Woodhouse?"
One question I have about outreach, and the reason I was asking like what exactly it means is, I'm glad to hear it doesn't mean kind of the typical problematic outreach. That's like, let's go bring all the people in and not change how we interact with them. But I'm also wondering if there's a piece of that, like if a bike is going out, to like also have some sort of gathering information from the community. Like, is that, like finding out like what it is that people want from their library and what things are, and what are the barriers?
I know when Sarah goes out, she's really good about that. And I think she's talked to the people who do the book bike and do some of these even bikeless like out events, is yes, you're there with the materials, but like your job is to like be a spy on the inside and figure out like, is this a good place for us to come back? Where did some of these people come from to get here? Is there a place where we could get closer to them? What are the barriers to them actually coming to the main brand? Like, they do a lot of investigation when they're out. And I think once the bike does start going out, I mean, she'll probably have to start from scratch with what are the new pain points and where are the new places we need to go. But that is something that I know at least Sarah, when she went out, would do.
That's great.
As our manager of community engagement, that's pretty much Sarah's whole routine so far.
And they would give us, the first couple of years, and just because we didn't do it last year, we didn't get it, but they have provided us with like maps of all of where the bike activity was for a given year at the end of it. So we could see a map of the village where they were going, a lot of it being block parties, but other stuff, you know, the art on Harrison, or the What's Blooming on Harrison and the Arts District, and then a few other places where they would go. So we were seeing that, and in one of the conversations we would have, the questions we would ask is, okay, clearly we didn't get anything here. How are we going to address that next year? And they're like, we're working on that. It's like, and so there was, you know, so they were collecting that information, you know, both the anecdotal and the analytical, and looking at it and trying to make adjustments and strategy changes.
And she did come to us with some extra ideas pre-pandemic as well. Like, I think Sarah was the person who said like getting children's books into some of the laundromats as a way of getting books out to kids in ways that maybe you wouldn't necessarily be able to, but in a place where some of the underserved of the community are spending like a good chunk of their time.
That's awesome.
So, you know, she did come back with some like semi non-traditional, you know, ideas of, you know, what can we do? That's sort of where the housing forward piece came in. Like, how do we have a roaming library between 7 different sites and blah, blah, you know, how do we keep track of, you know, she came back with those ideas and, you know, for, you know, staff and for the board to kind of figure out. So, you know, like Matt said, like the information that she and her team bring back becomes actionable. I think we just, you know, post COVID or post C-19, we need new information because those spots are kind of moved.
Right.
Can we circle back to something that you asked earlier, which is what of the flexibilities or innovations that we put in place during the pandemic would we want to carry forward? Like, have staff started to identify certain things that like, well, this is a pretty great way of doing things, or things like, this didn't
We
really
don't
work
need that
out. It's like,
Sure.
yeah.
A lot of things depending on the area you're talking about. For instance, what we learned was that some staff members can achieve a lot of work remotely.
Yeah.
They have to, right? And so, and there's lots of implications or opportunities there. For instance, before the pandemic, we were, again, some of you were on board, but we were having lots of conversations about our master facilities. Right? What do our spaces and areas?
It seems like a
years
million years
ago.
ago, but it was right before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right, so what do our spaces need to look like?
Yeah.
What do we need them for? Who needs to use them? How do they need to use them? And particularly in regard to the main library, what if any adjustments, changes do we need to make to those spaces? And you know, right now, or up to this point, we have.
Sarah's having trouble hearing you.
Oh. At all, Sarah, or is my voice just?
She can't hear you.
at all?
Yeah. Scooch the mic, maybe?
This microphone is dead.
Speaking of books in laundromats, how many of you have been to the world's largest laundromat in Suriname? And seen their children's section that they have, and they actually have books there?
I think the last time I was there, I was not concerned because they did not have a small.
Sarah, is that better?
It is just,
Okay.
it truly is.
Yeah,
amazing
that's
as a community
weird. I
center.
didn't realize.
Yeah, it
Dial.
really is.
Hopefully the others will stay charged. Okay, so what was I saying? Master facilities plan. We're having this conversation. How do people need to use our spaces? How do they expect to use them? How do we want to change them? Pandemic comes, staff are working remotely, right? We know that right now, a lot of space in this building is being used just for staff members, right? Well, but on the other hand, if we can continue to allow under some circumstances, staff to work remotely, where on some days, some staff members are here and some staff members are remotely, maybe we don't need as much space in the building. Maybe we can transition some of that space back to public use. So, and that's not a conversation we were having 2-3 years ago when we were talking about the master facilities plan. So that's an important thing, right?
Is
there.
Billy talking about creating flexibility into work
Oh, yeah.
arrangements?
Oh, for sure we
You
are.
know,
Absolutely,
okay, yeah.
absolutely. And, you know, we're being trying to be very, very thoughtful about that because, you know, there too, there are equity issues, like
For
who
sure.
gets to work remotely,
sure.
who can never work remotely
yeah.
because of the kind of job that they do, right? But even so, yes, I mean, our expectation is that staff will be permitted to work remotely much more routinely than they were before because we've just discovered all the possibilities that can present to us. So that's just one example.
So I
David?
have, I'm sorry.
No, when would we revisit the master facilities plan?
Well, I mean, we can revisit it as soon as this coming year if we want to start going back to that in that direction again, for sure. You know, I think that, but in doing so, I think we have to completely start over.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
We have to completely.
That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah, we have to completely, what we were doing and what we were talking about seemed incredibly relevant 2 years ago, and I'm just not sure it is anymore.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Thanks. I was just wondering, you said that staff will be, you know, like we're hoping with the remote work. I also wanted to raise the question of like staff using their own resources when they're working from home. So like the internet, like, is there a question or is there a possibility, or maybe we should be thinking about stipends for something like that? I know that
We've been doing that all through the pandemic.
Yeah.
Since we started having staff work remotely,
Oh, that's
we've been giving them monthly stipends to help cover the expense of using the internet or using technology. So we've been doing that. And I think that is even when we have staff continuing to work remotely, it won't be as prevalent as it is now. In other words, you know, we'll have more staff, of course, in the building, but as we do that, our expectations that we'll continue to provide that stipend.
Can I ask you how much it is?
Gosh, what are we giving staff right now? $25 or $50 a month, something like that. I'm sorry, I don't.
No, it's okay.
don't
Because
remember.
I that was just curiosity
Yeah.
because my college gave us, but we got $20 a month, and they made a big deal about it. But then we learned that it was federally mandated or something like that. We were there, you know. So they were like, well, we're like, you know, we spent like a-
about offering this thing that we're being forced to offer you.
Right, exactly.
They wanted you to think that they were being.
Yeah. And we were like, you know, we just spent like $1,000 on all these ring lights. I mean, obviously it wasn't $1,000 on ring lights, but like, you know, it was something like that, something absurd. That was a conversation that we brought to the table, and they're like, well, you guys are getting that stipend, and we're like, $20 a month that you were being made to give us. So I was just I was curious
Yeah.
about what that is and
Do you
the
mind,
expectation.
would you all mind if I just call Emmanuel back again?
Oh, sure.
Is that okay? I'll be right back in just 1 second.
So I think I'll table, I have a few things about our physical environments that I'll table until we revisit the facilities master plan, but I don't necessarily think it's a good use of our time to start talking about.
Okay.
Like,
Can you let us in on what some of them are?
Can you hear us, Sarah?
Mary Ann.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Mary Ann was
I just couldn't hear David with his dead microphone.
makerspace and, you know, all those conversations I think we should table until we. the library-
Makerspace is definitely something I was thinking
Like, I still
about.
think we need to talk about those things. I just don't think they're really.
I think we need to talk about those things, but I think it'll be easier to talk about them when we know what kind of space we're getting
Right.
from
Exactly.
people working at home.
Right.
I'm
If
all
that's
excited
okay.
about kicking everybody out and getting some fun stuff.
they're making us come back, so.
Great British Baking is gonna come back on. I work from home now.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
I've seen on the website the rendering of the teen space.
Yes.
Yeah,
Is there anything more that we have that you guys have seen besides those kind of stills that Stephen had of the space? There's nothing physically going on right now at the site, is there?
Don't think so.
It's just
Not yet.
empty?
Yeah.
I was just curious because I know we have a fall opening date. I didn't know if that meant like it's already done, you just can't go in there yet, or if.
No, I think.
I haven't been physically in the building, so I was curious with you guys being there.
I was gonna say I haven't either, but of course here I am right now, but where?
It'll be just around the corner from here, just past like the art gallery.
It's like the windows that face Scoville and
Oh, that's nice.
in that
and
corner.
Lake Street.
So at the last meeting, didn't Stephen say that there was some furniture delivery that was happening already
Yeah.
or something?
I thought he did, but it could all be in storage.
Yeah, that's true.
We're speaking of teen space, David,
Yes,
teen space.
okay.
Yeah.
What about teen
But it's
space?
not.
I was just asking if any of it had physically been done. I'd seen the renderings, but since you guys were in the building, I just wondered if there was anything that had happened yet.
There is some work going on right now. Furnishings have been ordered. So yes, there is some work going on. We're expecting that it'll be ready by the time we get to Labor Day.
Nice. Are we gonna plan like I don't know in COVID times if that's appropriate. Are you guys planning like a community opening or
I
the
think Steve
teen
and I-
group? Are they planning something?
I think they are. I need to talk to Stephen and Lori about what that might be, the plan, but yes, I think that's the
Do you
expectation.
have a giant pair of scissors?
I don't.
You can open.
I can bring some, Virginia. I have a pair.
Oh, do you really?
Yay.
May I?
Get it from Amazon.
You can get them from Amazon.
May I
But I have some in my car that I keep for just those occasions when you might need to cut a really big ribbon.
Your life must.
I was just gonna say Sarah's life. I want Sarah's life where you're like,
I was gonna
at
say,
any
you
point, you might be invited
I
to.
don't know
a
if you know
ribbon cutting.
Jonathan Pepper, but I was like, because he works for Walgreens on community events and he's always at like store reopenings and stuff like that. I was like, we could give him a call and see if he's got a pair too.
He definitely has a pair in his trunk too, I'm sure of it.
May I cut from scissors to a question that maybe just
Cut
is
from
outside
scissors.
of our most recent conversation here. Looking at the fourth strategic goal for the racism journey, I was really interested in the objectives under structural racism goals. David, can you tell us what we can do to be leaders in the field as we're putting so much effort and money into this? How are we reaching out to the larger library community, to other libraries, to the village? I mean, what do you think that we will be doing and what can we do to make a larger impact?
So I'm not sure exactly
This
which
is,
objective you're
the
referring to.
pages aren't numbered, but it's under external practices,
Uh-huh.
very last structural racism goal. And I would assume that as you.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
As you speak to the candidates.
Yeah.
One of the things I would hope that this person would be doing
Mhm.
is to think, okay, we're just not thinking about what we can do here.
Oh, no.
And
right.
so how are we linking with the village, with ALA and all, or how will we?
Well, so firstly, I think that the way we do that, one way that we do that with our plan and with RGW's help is by, and this is the whole idea of one of the main ideas, of bringing in a director of equity and anti-racism, right? So we started by really being focused on our organization. How does it operate? How is it led? What do its policies look like? How does it treat staff members? All of that sort of inwardly focused, investigation of our environment. That's where Rashida and RGW started with us, right? And so we've done a lot of that work already, and there's still more work to do, but we've done a lot of that. And now our focus is beginning to shift to what is now the organization, the library's engagement with the broader community. And a part of that is using our work as an example for other organizations and government agencies in the community. And that's, starting to, I think, have an effect as more organizations like the Park District, the township, the village look at what we're doing and thinking about how the kind of work that they also might need to do. I mean, the township is also now engaged with RGW to do some of this work. And then having a director of equity and anti-racism, who's one of that person's primary objectives will be to, again, figure out what does now our relationship as an organization, as an anti-racist organization look like when we think about how we engage with the community, with other agencies, with other stakeholders, with other libraries. Right. So again, up to this point, a lot of our focus has been inward, and now we're starting to shift that outward.
And how does that mesh with all the training we've given to staff and all through the Harvard? I mean, looking outward.
Yeah, well, I think Rashida herself talks about what a nice fit that is, because yes, it is thinking about what that relationship looks like. I mean, we know that if we're very intentional or continue to be very intentional about this work, our relationship with the community is going to start changing. People are going to start experiencing the organization in different ways. Some people are going to like that, and some people are not necessarily going to like that. They're going to see things differently. They're going to see us reprioritizing and doing things that may be different than the way they're used to doing them. And maybe that's some of what you're already experiencing when people will write to you and say, it just doesn't feel like the library that I experienced 10 or 20 or more years ago. You have less of this, and you're doing this, and there's all this other kinds of noise and activity going on, and I don't feel quote unquote safe in the space. I mean, it's not an accident that you might be hearing more of that as we change as an organization, right?
And Suzanne, when I mentioned Harwood, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
What happened to that cohort?
Well, so the cohort, thank you. The cohort met at the end of last year with Rich Harwood and a couple of Harwood coaches to try to begin to do the training, and unfortunately it stalled. There were lots of conversations in that group, and some of you were a part of that, about whether or not the training was really starting from the point that our community or our cohort needed it to. Rich and the coaches, of course, came in, no fault of theirs, with the expectation that where we're starting is that this cohort is ready to begin this work together, and now we're going to show you what this practice is and how to use it. And it became really clear to him, to Rich Harwood, in just a few hours of speaking with the group, that the members of the cohort were not all on the same page about that, and whether this was even a safe space for everyone in that group.
Is it going to be restarted, or is
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to. If we do, I think that the cohort either might need to be reconstituted, or we might need to. I need to continue to think with him about how to do that. But for now, it's stalled.
Okay.
Yeah, it's stalled.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A little bit to what Ted was saying, just from my time working with, and I say working with and not on, because I try to keep quiet, because I'm also keeping quiet is not my forte. But some of these structural objectives we can't achieve until we, for lack of a better phrase, get our own house in order. So a lot of kind of in my mind, when Rashida walked us through this, the reason this is on the back pages because we have to tackle all the other pages first. Not that we have to get the other things perfect, but a large part, to what David said, of the structural outreach is showing ourselves as an example of this kind of framework working successfully.
Fair enough. Instead of
So-
just saying, you know, watch us, we're gonna do it right.
Exactly. So, you know, when we were talking about, you know, access to technology, we're now going to be able to go to other governing bodies or other libraries or other interested parties and say, you know, this is what we did, this is what we were able to do, this was the impact. And that can be the way that we show that, and now that's outside of strictly, you know, race and equity. But that's sort of the same kind of framework that we're looking at here, is make it successful within our own four walls, make sure that our employees feel comfortable with it, make sure our leadership feels comfortable with it, make sure we feel comfortable with it, and then once everybody here inside the building is on the same page, then we start, and this is sort of, you know, when David talked about Jody Colo coming into some of the meetings, she's really been working with Rashida on messaging. So when a patron comes in and says, you know, why are da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, all of our employees are on the same page of, this is why we're doing it, this is why it's important, this is why, you know, it's a priority here in this building.
Great.
And making sure that, you know, we all understand what the messaging is, what the reasoning is, making sure that we're comfortable with it. I think the last piece to the structural racism is getting the director in place, because there are some of these places and spaces that we need to go, that we can't send a whole board, we can't send a whole cohort, we need to send one person into the space to represent us holistically. So once we have that director, there are going to be other places and spaces where we can send one person with the power of the library and our structure and our ideas behind them, that we can't send like a group of people to go in. And right now, we have a group of people, we have a great group of people, but it's really big and it can't, like, you can't send them all the places, you know, you need to have one spearhead person that can take that on. So I think we're gonna end up tackling more of this once we solidify some of the things in-house, like the affinity groups, like figuring out, you know, how are we reallocating work and time for people who are participating in objectives that are strictly tied to this. You know, once we get those pieces together and we have a point person that understands and knows all the pieces and parts that can go out and interact with other, you know, libraries or other departments, then we're going to see more of this come to fruition. So I think that's why it's a little bit light compared to some of the other sections, but we need to tackle the first part and get a director in place before we can see everything in that section come together.
So I have a couple of questions, or actually, as I was listening to you, Virginia, I had a thought about this, which is, you know, you're saying that we need to get sort of our house in order first. My experience with any anti-racist work is I tend to be very skeptical of there being like a place that we like, a defined place, because of course, as we have more discussions about anti-racism, what that looks like, as we include more voices, will shift and change. And at the same time, I feel like there's also an urgency, obviously, around anti-racism, where we can't wait for like everybody to literally be on the same page before we do some, you know, that we continue to be so I'm more sort of invested in the idea of like the processes, and I'm wondering if there's not actually like a middle ground maybe, where we can be the venue for some of the work, you know, that's community facing, before, you know, but not necessarily be the people who are saying this is how anti-racism works. Does that make sense?
I don't think we're gonna say this is how anti-racism is going to work. I think it's going to be anti-racism work lives here. Hi, welcome, come on in. And they're just going to see it as they interact with us. It's going to be a priority when we look at, you know, our digital offerings. It's, you know, when we talked earlier about things being fine free and that sort of being a hard line for us.
You're right.
That's part of that. It's going to be that you experience anti-racism through how we treat our staff, what kind of collections and materials we choose. You know, we're very lucky that we have a staff that is open-minded and willing and motivated to look at this. But also, it's important to remember it's just a framework. And it's a framework, but it's just a framework, meaning that it's just the scaffolding.
Sure.
It's going to put in place enough that when we do come across something else that needs to be addressed. We'll have a roadmap for how we did it for another group or another time. And we can move things around and we can make it accommodate. The purpose, I think, right now is setting everybody's mindset to not just racial equity, but all equity. We're doing it through racial equity because that's where we have the most data, that's where we have the most access, that's what reflects inside of our employees. But it's setting up a framework that can then be shifted to every other type of equity. I know that in our group, in the group meetings, that's something that we've talked about is, okay, this looks good, I like this. How do we translate this to the LGBTQ community? How will this translate to a disability set? Like, how is this gonna move to the other frameworks? I don't think anyone at that table thinks like, and we will finish this and we're done and everything will be wonderful. It's
Sure.
putting something in place so that we can apply to other situations. Know better, do better. But I don't think we're going to like stand here and like proclaim like, we did it, come and see us. What happens?
I am
exactly?
so reassured to hear that, because David and I were just talking about this a little bit last week, and I really like that as an intention.
One of the phrases that in different ways that we hear a lot at the table is, this isn't going to ever be done.
Right.
We just don't want anything that we're doing to be able to be backtracked.
Yeah.
Or if it's going to be, we want to
Yeah.
Well, it's
Well,
also,
The the reason was not to like, to be skeptical about like our, the efforts the library is going through. I'm just trying to figure out like what might some of these steps, like how can we get involved, right? Because one of the external practices objectives is to activate library programming that builds community awareness and capacity in anti-racism, right? Like, so I'm trying to figure out what some of that might look like that we could be learning even as we're doing the community work. Does that make sense? So like, for instance, one of the things that of course, I'm a professor, so one of the things that I would love to see happening are like actual classes, you know, like where you literally sit and read books, you know, that are whatever cultural forms, other cultural forms, I guess there might be other than books, I don't know. But you know, so we can do some of that work, but we wouldn't be teaching any of those classes, right? Like, but we could be the venue for some of that work to happen, or we could be like in partnership with other libraries to help like activate some of that work, right? So I'm just trying to figure out.
We are doing that, for the record.
What?
We are doing that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
do some of that. I
Yeah,
think
it's
it
like
will.
I think we'll now look at it more intentionally as, instead of like just community outreach or just, we do this because it's the right thing. We'll now start to kind of couple it with this framework.
Right.
But like, if you look at the idea box, if you look at some of the digital offerings we have, we do intend, if you look at like the whole Dole Museum collection of, I know every time I walk in there, it's amazing. But you know, it has been a priority. I think it may be that maybe when we have this director, there's a more intentional path, or
Right.
there's instead of one-off courses, maybe they say, we're going to do a course on such and such, you know, it
Yeah,
may become a little
exactly.
bit more intentional or a little bit more honed, and that's something we can look at. But more things I'm thinking about are, you know, we know that access is closely related to socioeconomics, and socioeconomics is closely tied to race. So when we're
Right.
looking at like the outreach and the book bike, are we going to have the outreach team work with this director for pinpointing where places are priorities? You know, we can't get to everywhere, so are we going to prioritize some of these places and spaces?
Right.
It's something that we did before, but are we going to do it with a different intentionality
Right.
under this framework? So I think a lot, you know, David kind of alluded to it before, like with the fines, like we were doing it, we just didn't have a place to put it in a framework. We just said, we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. We're going to have a lot of the right things that we're already doing, and we're going to have a more intentional space to put it. We're going to have a better way to organize it and a better place to aim it. We're going to have somebody who can look at those things holistically through, you know, the entire library system. And like I said to Ted, we're going to have one person who can go and liaise with, you know, other libraries or with the city or wherever we think they need to go, in a way that you can't send like we're gonna send just the outreach person, and then she's gonna do 55 back and forths to get it coordinated. You know, we're gonna
Right.
have somebody who can take care of those things a little bit more quickly.
And have a better way to talk about it and communicate. about it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And then, you know, that person's gonna partner with, you know, marketing and things so that we are getting out to people. We are using some of those new digital avenues that we got during COVID to reach out to people who previously were not coming to the library. Like, it's going to be, you know, the framework is just a framework. I think a lot of what the framework is going to turn out to be is taking some of the things we're doing, making them intentional, shifting them into a specific space instead of we're doing this because we know it's right and we're just gonna do it because those are the people we are. We're now gonna have a codified way of saying, like, we do this because it aligns with this intentional framework that we
Right.
have.
Yep.
And then we're gonna see where the holes and the pieces and the parts are, because we'll have the framework and we'll be able to fill those in with intentionality.
So I'm just curious about like, because it seems to me that we could do both, right? Like, so we were talking about the broadband access, for instance. That's something that we spent a lot of time this meeting talking about. And Suzanne pointed out that it would dovetail nicely with an anti-racist strategic plan. I'm not sure that I would see it specifically come out through one of these bullet points, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't follow up on it.
No.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so it feels like the intentional pieces and the codifying is really great for like
don't think-
marked progression.
I don't think there's gonna be anything that we're like, well, we would do it if the framework was done. Like, it's not gonna be like that. It's
Right,
gonna be
exactly.
like,
So,
we're doing it, and isn't it great that, you know, we'll be able to fill in this part of our framework
right,
because it's like, as my niece likes to say, two things can be true.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
it's going to fit into multiple places because, you know, it's why we're adding it as a pillar, not because it is wholly and separate from everything else,
right.
but because a lot of our initiatives are gonna fall into, you know, more than one of those quadrants.
Well, yeah, and that's why we also said that we wanted this plan at least for a year to stand all by itself, so that we
Yeah.
could do this kind of evaluation about what, you know, what do we need to do and where does it fit? How does it fit? Before we talk about aligning all the priorities together so that we, you know, because, you know, up until now, we've had one strategic plan. Well, now essentially we have two. We've got
Yeah.
the one with the previous priorities, engagement, learning, and stewardship, which are still our priorities. And now we have this anti-racism strategic plan. And we said, well, at least for a year, this has to stand on its own. We have to be evaluating the things we're doing separately before we think about how to bring these together. And again, I think that is a big part of what a director will help us figure out over the next year or so. You know, how do we now say, you know, all of this is really embedded as our, you know, as our strategic plan.
And we've had
So-
80 applicants for the director.
We had 80 applicants, and we've.
I am impressed. Is that a
Like
surprising number
library
to you?
Oh, I almost,
Yeah.
yeah, it was incredible.
And boy, do we have great expectations for this superhuman.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got, I mean, so the 10 people that we told Rashida we wanted to continue a conversation with, you know, they're just, I mean, they're amazing. The experiences and the qualifications that they have. So, you know, Billy was just asking me the other day, so are you confident that, you know, of these 10 now that we've identified that we're gonna find our direct? I said, absolutely, there's no doubt in my mind.
When we get to grill, I mean.
So yes, there will be an opportunity for multiple groups to be a part of that process. So the advisory team, other staff teams. So yes, there will be opportunities.
One thing I just wanted to add when we're talking about the whole, where you were talking about getting our own house in order and this idea of like, can't we do both? I will say that from my experience, trying to push a boulder uphill at a certain children's literature organization, between the years of 2015 and 2019, that urge to kind of go out and do outreach, this is what I was talking about with the outreach, is and just, oh, let's like get diversity and do outreach before like looking at what the culture is and how the culture is creating barriers. It doesn't work. It just plain doesn't work, right? And I know you know that. So like,
No,
that's the, and so I'm really glad to hear that this like internal work is going on with the library, because there's a lot of things that, you know, I think we've all seen over the years that happen unintentionally at the library. The time I walk in and there's a big Blackhawks thing on the check-in desk, you know, or my nephew saying all the books are, you know, all the kids in the books are white, so I want to be white, and he's not. Things like that, you know, didn't happen through intention, but happened through the, you know, all the structures. So,
Because it's default.
right, because
the atmosphere.
white supremacy culture is just, it's everywhere.
And
So,
it's literally everybody keeping their eyes open, like from frontline staff.
Yeah.
Through us, which is why.
right. And it's, from what I understand, staff has been doing training, right? Because I had, maybe I should, staff's doing training with equity groups, is that right?
Yes.
With like,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
um,
I mean,
yeah.
that's again, as our, you know, as we've been more inwardly focused on the work for the last year, tons of training. Both
Yeah.
Rashida and RGW have been offering that the leadership team, the management team, staff members have been doing, and now looking for, you know, how to continue that.
yeah, that's, I mean, I think that's so
Yeah.
key and getting, you know, so it's really good to hear that it's not just initially like, okay, you know, let's go get people in who aren't coming in, and, you know, let's look at,
Well, and that's why, you know,
Um,
and again, Rashida and I have had this.
because it's systemic.
Yeah, I mean, right. And she and I've had this conversation many times. I've said, because, you know, people were asking me more than 2 years ago, why isn't there somebody on staff who is just focused on this? Why don't we have an equity director? Why don't we have a diversity director or whatever? And, you know, I went to Rashida myself over 2 years ago and said, look, I have to put together a plan to begin doing this work. I mean, I didn't even have that conversation with the board yet. I went to her and I said, I need you to help me figure this out. And it was after many conversations that she and I started figuring out what we wanted to do before we finally got to this point where we said, we want to hire this person. And I've said to her, and she's agreed, that if we had just at that time, just like jumped right in and said, okay, we need to have, so we're going to hire somebody, that would have been a disaster. That would have been a disaster, because I've seen this happen in other organizations where they do this and it just fails miserably. We had to spend these 2 years doing all of this other work. We had to do that before we were ready to do this. So I'm very glad we didn't just say, okay, just like, yeah, if that's what you say we have to have, then I'm gonna hire somebody, we'll do it. Oh, I'm so glad we didn't do
Those
that.
things those are really, because then, like, anytime anything slightly that has to do with race happens, it gets like forwarded to this one office, so we don't do the work, you know, the rest of us don't do the work. Right, like, so it's like,
Right.
oh, well, this is, the diversity person is gonna think about this and figure out a solution.
Right.
So I completely agree, and I think that it's really, really important to go through like maybe as many anti-racist trainings as it takes. It's just, I like this sense of teleology of the, like, this is, you know, like, this is wrapping up and now that's the next step. That's the part that really affects me, because I think that we don't even know what we don't know until we start including more and more. So as we
Right.
empower more voices, like, the conversation will shift.
Oh,
And
yes.
then, and
I
then
agree
those
with that.
things, and
I
then
agree with
those things will shift. And then we have to go, you know, we have to keep all of that in mind. And I think you're right that it's like all the time, but also I keep talking about this in the other contexts where I'm trying to talk about anti-racist work too, which is that, you know, there's that stat, the 3% statistic. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's a statistic that there's like, you only need 3% of people to be protesting in the streets for there to be like a change in the regime of a country, right? Like, and the idea being that sometimes you can't wait for like everybody to get on board, right? Like, sometimes the regime needs to change, and, you know, we need to figure out how to empower the people who are doing the hardest work to like be there and be visible and get, you know, to get sort of ball rolling. And I think that that's where I was coming from, not like, you know, we're done here, like, let's move on to the outreach. But in fact, that the outreach is not about us teaching the community, but us inviting more people to change us, more perspectives to change us. That would be hopefully what, you know, like I would love to see. And so the question you asked a while back, Virginia, was like, what are the costs of the anti-racism work, right? Like literally, where does it go on our budget? And that's such an important question, because often the flip that we can't answer is what are the costs to not doing the work, right? Like those are not in any budget. Those are, you know, and we have to keep that in mind too.
We've got a trustee waiting.
Hey.
Is that a nice segue to the budget?
I think so.
Chibi.
Nice to
Chibi?
be on.
Hello, Chibi K.
No GBK? Yes, GBK.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, I apologize for jumping on so late. I had some horrible car trouble yesterday and we're just getting done taking care of it right now.
No worries.
We're happy to have you.
So, do you need a break?
Just as he's coming on.
So, or not. I mean,
No,
you
no,
just tell me.
I was actually thinking about that, just like a quick 5 minutes of stretching legs and bathroom breaks
Yeah.
for those.
Great. Okay, so let's do that. I'm not going to obviously
away,
stop
Chibi.
the Zoom, but I am going to pause the recording while we do that.
I was not well.
All right.
So where do you want, where would you like the conversation to go
We were
next?
gonna talk about budgets, right?
Yeah.
So, great, perfect. So I've given you just one brief, you know, and I'm sorry, Sarah, I don't know that you have did I send you the few sheets that I provided to the board here in person? Do you have those?
She's on break.
She's not there, okay. Just to be sure, I'm gonna email what you're looking at to both Chibi K and Sarah so that if they want to open it up, they can. So just give me one moment here.
What are we looking at now?
So the
Is
last
it in the
page of that packet, that the printed packet that's in front of you on your table.
Oh,
The last
printed.
page, the last page. Just gonna see this real quickly. Yeah, just make sure. So yeah, the last page is just a summary sheet of the budget for the way it's looked, general revenue and expenditure categories for the last several years, including the current fiscal year 2021. Just take a look at that for a moment while I send this. Okay. So now Sarah and Chibi K in the email will get what you're looking at. So again, just to give you a reminder, a general high-level overview of revenue and expenses for the library. So as you can see, obviously, as I said before, the great majority of our operating revenue comes from property taxes, local real estate taxes. Very, very little percentage-wise comes from any other source of revenue. And so really what we can do, what we can prioritize, what we can expend, what we might have to keep in a fund balance to put toward future capital projects. All of that is really driven by the tax levy, right? So the decision that you make about what kind of a levy request that you're comfortable with has a big impact. And I know that how you feel about that and how you prioritize that is not only, I think, the motivation there is not just what does the library need to accomplish its mission, but what do you think the community can bear in terms of additional taxes? And so I understand that you're balancing a lot of different needs or priorities that the community might have. But I want you at least to again be reminded that for us, And that's different. I mean, obviously, every government agency, from the village to the schools to the park district, all obviously rely on real estate taxes, but most of the others also rely heavily on fees. So if we're talking about the village, or if we're talking about the park district, their operating revenue is supplemented a great deal by the kinds of fees that they charge. The library doesn't do that. In fact, the few, as you were talking about before, the few fees that we did have, we eliminated. So, when we talk about the fact that the library and the park district, for instance, are almost even in the kind of the levy percentage that they have, remember that only represents half of the park district's operating revenue, because they're basically on a 50-50 split. 50% of their operating revenue from taxes, 50% roughly from fees. So again, just a little bit more context for you there. And then you see then underneath the revenue projection, or the revenues from the previous fiscal years in 2021, into the 5 or 6 major categories, starting with people, again, the largest by far of our expense categories, library materials being the next largest. After that, facilities management, after that, support services, and then finally public services, which are all of our public programs and other services that we provide other than library materials.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can you draw a line a little bit between what is the difference between public services and support services?
Sure. So support services are a lot of administrative services. So support services is lots of things. Support services is insurance, it's audit, it's supplies, it's many things. And when you see, and you will, as soon as we, next month, when you start getting the first initial drafts of a budget, you'll see a lot more of that detail, what actually constitutes support services.
So David, as I look at this, are we suggesting that we are $1 million in the red if we look at our current budget? I mean, is that
What we're saying is that we have been intentionally spending down our fund balance.
Okay, so there's the fund balance.
Right.
Are we eliminating parking lot revenue?
We will not, well, we did, because not eliminating the revenue, we eliminated the expectation of revenue, right? So we've just started opening up again, right? So there will be some, but we knew we didn't say, if we can't count on it, we're not gonna say we're gonna depend on it for our operations.
Well, you should get like $2 from me today.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, actually, we've off about it. I'm not gonna go there.
So 10.
I'm not gonna go. So what, just looking at this, again, very, very general overview, what other questions do you have? What other questions come to mind?
Can we talk about pay equity? Is this a good?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
So for our newest trustees, we had conversations about this during the last budget, but just wanted to get an update on, where we are for this. I mean, I know we're gonna talk about this probably
Sure.
at length when we get our
Right.
budget, but,
Yeah, so a couple of days ago, Billy and I were sitting down, because now he's, just as Jeremy is starting to ramp up with staff, having meetings about budget and budget expectations and what they want and what they need. Billy is now sitting down and doing all of his market calculations and market investigations, right? So, hi, Sarah. Can you hear us okay? Great. So, and Sarah, I emailed something to you just a few minutes ago, which is the few pages that we're discussing here. So if you want to open it up, you'll be able to look at what we're looking at.
I've heard you guys the whole time. I just was eating a snack and didn't want you to
That's okay.
feel like you were watching me eating a snack.
I wish I
That
could
performative eating.
deliver a donut to you virtually, but we got them here on the table. So what was I saying? So anyway, Billy has been doing that work. And so he and I were just talking yesterday, and he was saying, okay, so I'm doing this as I always do. This is the time of year, and I will start putting together, assuming that we would continue down the path that we've been going with wage and salary equity, with a recommendation for what those increases might look like, which staff positions and which staff wage categories would need to receive greater increases than others. So he's doing all of that right now. So my expectation is that he'll be ready to present that information to you in August. And so, because that will be the first month where, again, we'll sit down and we'll look at, the way I'm thinking about this, you have a board meeting, regular board meeting coming up in 3 days, right? So I was thinking that what we would do is we would continue sort of this conversation at that meeting. And at that meeting, most of the rest of the leadership team will be there as well. And so you might have an opportunity to ask more of them some of these kinds of questions too. And then in August, we then present you the first draft of a budget with revenue expectations and wage and salary expectations.
Do we have the ARP funding discussion on Tuesday's agenda?
ARP funding.
Rescue plan.
Yeah, so yes, that's a part of it. So in my report, I mentioned at least 3 grant opportunities that the Illinois State Library is now making available based on the funds that it's received. So, most of that money, what happens with it is it gets distributed to the state agencies that are responsible for library services in those states. So most of the federal money that's going to come to Illinois that's specifically for libraries is going to go to the Illinois State Library, and it has. And now the Illinois State Library said, okay, so we've got this money. Now here we've developed 3 grant opportunities that libraries can apply for to receive these funds to achieve certain objectives. And so I mentioned all of those in my report that you'll see for next Tuesday. And right now, our leadership team is expecting that we're going to apply for all 3 of them and see what we can achieve. Yeah, and that part of that conversation too was the one we were having earlier about the village and how much money it's going to get, and would the library be prioritized in any of those kinds of conversations. But really, there are very few opportunities. I guess what I'm trying to say is that for our library to apply on its own directly for the federal money, there are those direct opportunities. There really aren't that many. So we're going to go through the state library and then look for whatever other opportunities we can get.
May I ask just it's a silly hypothetical, and it'll be just asking you
Go ahead.
a quick answer.
Yeah.
If Jeff Bezos were to give us $1 million extra, what would you do with that windfall?
What would I do with it? I would present it to the board and I would say, what do you want to do with it?
That's
Nicely done.
passing the buck. No,
Nicely done.
that's passing the buck.
No, that was impressive.
Goodness.
And if we said, yeah, what are your recommendations? David?
Well, so one thing I would say, I would probably say I have a lot of things to say about that, but one of the things I would say is, and Jeremy was talking with Susanna Mutterima about this the other day. We have historically, or at least as long as I've been here, the way we have been planning for and managing improvements to our capital, to our facilities, to our buildings, is through a fund balance. So, we've intentionally budgeted in such ways that we're not going to expend all of our revenue for the year. And so then we know we will have a fund balance, and then we plan for capital improvements from that fund balance. Well, that fund balance is being spent down considerably. And one of the main sources of revenue that we were depending on is now gone, which is money that was being distributed to us from TIF districts, right? So we don't have that anymore. That's why we went through the public pain of adding that last TIF amount into our revenue expectations, that we wouldn't lose all of it. But now, we're not going to get those distributions anymore. So we're not going to be able to say, well, we're pretty sure we're going to get this amount of money. It's going to be considerable, maybe $400,000. We're not going to plan to expend that for operations, we're gonna make sure we have a fund balance. And then here's all of the lists of things from our capital asset study that we're gonna need to plan to use that money for. Now, what we're in a position of having to, in addition to prioritizing all of our equity and anti-racism work and doing the things we want to do regarding wage equity and other things, now we're going to have to figure out, how are we going to continue to prioritize the capital improvements and the replacements that we know are coming, right? So that's going to have to be a part of those conversations. So if somebody were to walk in and say, here is $1 million, one of my first piece of advice would be, put that $1 million into a capital improvement fund, say that's what it's for, and use that money so that the rest of the revenue that we have can continue just to be used for library programs and services and other operations. That's just one thing I would probably say. Does that make
So a
sense?
rainy day fund, basically.
Pardon me?
A rainy day fund.
Well, no, not a rainy day fund. I mean, you would say, this is our capital improvement fund. This is what this money is going to be used for. Assuming Jeff Bezos would say, I'm giving you this money and you get to decide what you want to do with it, rather me telling you, if you want this money, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
Which is usually the way that works. So just like
Mackenzie Scott would be a better example.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's probably gonna be his ex-wife who.
Exactly.
Who would do that rather than Jeff Bezos.
Thank you. That does help.
Does it help? Okay.
Right?
No, I think that, yeah, I mean, that's a hypothetical, but nice to go down that path.
So anyway, all right. So what other general sorts of questions do you have right now?
Can we talk a little bit, I see under our expenses that support services and public services seem to be the only thing outside of people that went up. Can we talk about why for that is?
Well, because I would say one main reason is that most of the money that we agreed to take additionally from real estate taxes, we put intentionally toward those categories. And there really wasn't much left to add to the other areas of expenditures. So in other words, when we said last year how much of an increase we were going to have from the levy and what we were going to do with that, that's really toward people is where that money went.
Okay. So if we're looking at, the difference between support services in 21 and support services in 20, if we went back to either one of those 2020 numbers, how would that, and the same question for public services, how would that impact what we are able to do if we were to backtrack to those 2020 numbers? Like, did we say we're going to spend it because we have it and we have these other projects we want to do? Or was it, we're not going to be able to operate in the way we have previously if we don't add these dollars? In that sense.
I'm trying to make sure I understand your question exactly. I guess part of my answer is, to answer your question, again, depends on how much additional revenue you are comfortable with, trying to ask from the tax levy, right? In other words, we say we're going to establish what our priorities are. My staff, me, Jeremy, Billy, others are going to come back to you in your budget conversations, and we're going to say, to achieve X, to achieve this priority, this is how much it's going to cost. In other words, for instance, to continue to make the sustained progress that we want to make on wage and salary equity, this is how much it's going to cost. And then we compare that to how much revenue can we expect from the tax levy and what's left, right? So that's, I guess, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well, yeah, because my thought is, people is going to go up, and it may go up more than we think it's going to, because we are adding in things like an internet credit for people who are working from home, maybe additional technology to that stuff. So I'm expecting that top number is going to go up more than maybe we have thought of in the past. We start talking about balancing and moving that bell curve so that everything's kind of sitting in there. So then the mommy budget in me is going, well, then where are we moving other monies?
Yeah.
And so the two things that seem to have gone up were support services and public services.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, if we were to take those numbers and move them, if we were to diminish a percentage that's going toward those, does that buy us more ability to balance out that people line in a way that we've been striving to do? Or is it gonna be short-term gain, long-term loss, where taking away the support services and the public services that we have there
Yeah.
are going to impact maybe the way our employees work or the way we're able to do the outreach
Yeah.
that we know that we want to do?
Well, so, I mean, we're having this conversation in sort of a general way, so I guess my answer is going to be rather general rather than specific. I would say that, to back out more money from things like the categories of support and public services, that's not going to change, I don't think, the way that staff work or how they do their jobs, because frankly, I'm not going to expect staff to do the old cliche, do more with less, right? So no. So I don't see that. I don't see that changing. What I see then is that more likely the community will experience differences, changes, because if the monies for those categories remains the same or goes down, by definition, that means there are some things that we're going to have to stop doing unless we find the money to do them from somewhere else, which means that there might be fewer of certain kinds of programs, or maybe it means we sunset certain things because we have new and different priorities. So what you might experience, or what staff might experience, is community members saying, why don't we get to do this anymore? Why don't we have that program anymore? That's more of what I think we would, and I would also say that particularly for support services, there are some things there that are just not necessarily discretionary. Like, so, our insurance brokers tell us how much we're gonna have to
And
pay.
that's why I was.
Yeah, right.
Support services and public services.
Yeah,
'Cause as you
public
said-
services, yeah, public services is mostly discretionary.
I was like,
What we're spending to provide services. Support services includes a lot of non-discretionary things. Right.
So I have a follow-up with that. So, first of all, I wanted to make sure that, so the 2021 request, did that include the sort of wage equity
Yes,
efforts?
yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right,
Yes,
so,
totally.
Yeah, I mean.
Yes, it did.
yeah,
So
so
we-
last year's budget
So when
was.
when last year's budget was passed, on January 1st, we enacted all of the increases for wages and salaries that were budgeted and made that adjustment.
And if I'm not mistaken, we did that at a different percentage than we did all other library operations.
Okay.
So
Yes,
There were people that needed to be brought up
Sure.
past the 3% or whatever
Right.
the budget was.
Right.
Yeah,
And those people got 11% or whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
to bring it.
Wasn't that partly?
I
'cause there was
wanted to
a
ask, because of
reduction
course
in
last year's budget
2016?
was COVID, so I didn't know, like, if you had to put any of these plans on hold or anything. or
we
how-
did not for that, we did not.
Okay. I also, so I'd had the same question about the differences between support services and public services, and do I understand it correctly that support services are supporting the operations of the library,
Yes,
and that the public services are the community-facing programs?
yes.
Okay.
So I'm gonna, while we're talking, I'm gonna bring up a more, on my screen, not yours, a much more detailed budget spreadsheet. And I'm gonna name for you some of the specific items that were, just to give you an idea.
Okay.
Some of the specific items.
Because I actually,
So I was gonna say, part of the reason I asked about this, what we were talking about earlier, like what things go in this
Yeah.
new strategic initiative that we're already doing. When we start talking about the dollars that we want to allocate to that, are there some that are already here
right,
that we're not, don't spend the same dollar
Yeah.
twice?
yeah.
Versus, are we gonna have to pluck something out of here and plug it over that,
Yeah, right, right.
If the things are already there, is
Right.
it just a matter of labeling them or?
Yeah, sure.
Do we need to do things?
Right.
So
my-
here's, I'm sorry, forgive me. Go ahead, finish what you were gonna say.
No. My follow, I would love to hear what those specifics are. I think I get the general difference between the two things. My question was going to be also that, I mean, I understand that the public services are comprised of more discretionary subcategories.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, it also seems like the kind of thing that the library should be doing, so I'm wondering.
So here's what the 2020 budget looked like for the general category of support, or I'm sorry, of public services. So that's all programs, all public programs for children's, young adults, teens, adults, community engagement, all of that. And all of that together was about $60,000. And then all of the rest is basically for lots of digital and information technology services. So all of the IT support, exactly. So we're talking about the roughly $100,000 a year we spend just to be a member of the SWAN consortium, to be a part of the union catalog. The roughly $200,000 we spend every year for all IT subscriptions and services. That's everything that we need to make sure that we have a functioning technology infrastructure. And then it's other equipment. And so all of that together, all the programming, which is a relatively small part of our budget, and then all of the IT and digital services support, that's what comes to about $400,000.
So, but as I'm hearing you speak, it doesn't seem like it's that discretionary either. Like, like it is the 60,000 of
the only truly discretionary thing there, assuming that we're not going to do less in IT and risk not having the kind of environment that we need, is programs.
Yeah.
Is programs.
So part of my asking about this was the jump. That was when we talked about, we need more portals into.
Right.
The thing, Overdrive,
Right.
Libby, and all that, to provide those digital. So when
That's
when I
part
was
of it.
talking when we got here about what digital things are we gonna pull back on
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not? This is one of those things that unless we decide we want less access or less access points for that.
Yes,
to-
perhaps,
And
So it's discretionary.
but
Yeah.
there would be implications to
And that's what you're saying, like, it wouldn't change us, but it would change, what the patrons have access
Yeah,
to. and what they-
right. Well, and you asked about what staff would experience, in the area of IT, there definitely would be something that staff would experience if we can't use our technology in all the ways that we're
Right.
needing to use them. So then if you look at support services, that's roughly $50,000 a year that we spend on all of our marketing and communications efforts. And then it's another, averaging it out the last couple of years, about $75,000 a year for insurance. That's a big part. All of our payroll processing, mileage and other staff reimbursements, legal fees, what we pay to our attorneys, postage and delivery, all of our supplies, that's close to $100,000 a year. All of that, all of the administrative expenses,
And
all of
just
that's
to be
part of
clear,
it.
when you say the 75K insurance under support services, that is not inclusive of insurance that we provide or something.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is
That's under-
that is only liability
Okay,
insurance.
so because
All of the health insurance, that's all a
that's
part
all
of,
under the people.
that's right, exactly. That's under people, right? So if you look
And
at,
as
right,
you pointed out earlier this morning, an entity like the Park District in public services charges for program.
Right.
We don't.
that's right. So, right, so if we were going to, if we were like the Park District, we would essentially be charging the community $60,000 a year in fees to participate in our programs. We don't do that.
Which just doesn't make sense.
We don't do that. That's not our model. That's not our model, right? So does that help?
Mhm.
Okay.
I have a question. In the people, does that include the Director of Equity and Antiracism salary?
Yes,
Okay,
people, yes,
and
yes.
does,
Oh, do you mean, has that number been added?
is that number included in that?
I don't think there's-
Not for this year, it will be for 2022.
No, that salary has not been added. This is for 2020.
Right.
This was the past,
let me-
this was our.
Yeah, we're looking.
These were the
you're
numbers we
looking at the
approved.
2021, the budget that we're in right now.
Right.
We haven't hired that.
This
person.
person's gonna be hired. in
Yes,
July.
I understand. So we're right. So, but that, we're going to be putting that budget together in the next couple of months.
When is the, I guess,
So
when
that
does the
person's
director
salary will
person
be
start?
part of that. I see.
Because they're starting in 2021, right?
Well, yes, by the end of the year, but yes, so I
Okay.
see I can see what your concerns and anxieties are. So let me add some more information here. The way that we manage our hiring and our personnel, every single time somebody leaves a position, we evaluate that position. Do we need to do this work in the same way? Do we need to have anybody in this position at all? What about this work can be done potentially in a different way, especially if we have shifting priorities? So a shift to a Director of Equity and Anti-Racism, that's a huge shift in priority, right? That's going to be an expense that we don't have right now. So to give you a specific example, we just had a longtime staff member, Sharon Grimm, who has been our staff learning coordinator, leave the organization. Now, we are intentionally not replacing that position. We are reallocating responsibilities for staff learning throughout the organization, and now individual directors and their managers are going to be much more directly responsible for managing the learning for their teams, right? So we're giving them more authority to manage that. So we're not, so part of the funds that we are not going to expend next year for the salary for that position are being reallocated to help to make sure that we can afford to hire, if you will, a Director of Equity and
And
Anti-Racism.
then I'm assuming because we had budgeted to pay that person a salary for the whole of this year.
Right.
That person having left, their salary would then cover
That's right.
the end of the year. and the
Correct.
entire-
That's right. Exactly. Right. So I mean, and again, we didn't do that just for this reason. I mean, again, we do that every single time somebody leaves a position. Again, another example I often give, when I got here 8 years ago, the director had 2 assistant directors, in addition to a whole host of managers in the organization. And I don't have any assistant directors anymore. What I have is a team of directors. So the organization has gone through these shifts and transitions and changes for the last 8 years. So we're always doing this kind of thing. So when people in the community, and I know that some of you are already hearing this, like, oh, they just keep adding. It's more money for salaries. No, it isn't, because we're always reevaluating how we're doing this. And yes, we are going to be paying a Director of Equity and Anti-Racism. Yes, I hope that the people who are applying consider that to be a rather, appropriate salary for that position. But it doesn't mean that that's another, $80,000 or $90,000 on top of everything else, because we never change anything else that we do. We're always reevaluating that.
Does the public services number
Yeah.
include any, no, probably not, any of the public services that might increase with that new position and the anti-racism strategic? Or is this only going to be looking forward for 2022?
So you're asking if for 2022 there would be changes in the public services budget because of this position?
Right, or does 2021 didn't take into account
It
any
did
of
not,
that,
no,
right?
No,
So
it did not.
When we were talking about the budget,
I don't remember that part of it coming up. We were still determining exactly what are just overall, what was our, general operational service going to even look like in 2021, because this was September of 2020. So
Right.
it was like, what we did, nothing was on the horizon.
Yeah.
So it was like, we were having these conversations about the anti-racism work, but we were not, I would say in our defense, we were trying to figure out when people were going to be back in the buildings at that point, and what that was going to look like when we were having this discussion. So that was
Right, that
probably
makes
more
sense.
front of
Yeah.
mind in our discussions, at least for my part. I don't want to put words in anybody else's mouth, but that was like, for me, that was where I was in the front of mind was, what is our picture of general operations going to look like next year, was when we were talking about that. So some of this anti-racism stuff, it wasn't ignored and pushed off, but it was not, for me, my memory of our discussions, not what we were really kind of, because we didn't know how were we going to be interacting with the public this year.
Right, right. It makes total sense. I'm just trying to figure out like
Base level piece.
what's in here. So when we're looking for next year,
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
things are
exactly.
likely to go up from that. And those seem like the, the two obvious.
A little bit earlier about programs we have, might have a new home or new direction under it. I think that's a little bit where I was going, is some of these dollars, we're still going to be spending them, but will they be, when we get the bigger breakout, are they gonna go from a regular programs budget item line to a, anti-racism programs line? Like, are we just gonna be moving the numbers and now, at least for now, at the beginning of the process, not changing the program completely? We're just gonna be putting it.
Yeah, and I would say that, within public services and programs, more of the money that we budget for that is, it's already being spent. We told at the beginning of this year and really at the end of last year, we told staff that within all of the public programs that you're going to be planning for next year, for children, for teens, for adults, our direction was, we are prioritizing equity and anti-racism. And so when you see the monthly reports that you get in the board packet, like for this month, you will see all of the programs that all of the teams are doing that are aligned with that priority. So already this year, I guess, to answer your question about how is that money being spent already on these priorities, well, a great deal of that $60,000 of programs this year is already being spent by children services, by adult services, by teen services to provide programs for the community that are directly aligned with equity and anti-racism priorities. Now we can, and we're going to continue obviously to prioritize that. So the question is, should we be more intentional about calling that out specifically within the budget, or do we continue to embed that in all of the different ways that we do it? Like, what is important? Is it important, or are both important? But is it important for people to look at a budget and see exactly this is being, this is how much money we're going to spend on anti-racism themed programs and services. Even though we know that it's already being spent, we're just calling it children's programming and teen programming and adult programming. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So maybe to your question, will the new position have its own programmatic budget? I mean, are you going to give this new position $10,000?
Potentially, but I would really love for that person to come into to the leadership team table and have that conversation, right? Let them see what we're doing and how we've been spending the money and help us figure out, okay, well, this is great what you're doing. over here, but maybe we need to do more of this, or maybe we need to have a separate line so that we can say that we're, intentionally spending just on that, and everyone can see that that's what we're doing.
So I think
You know,
that's
I-
the question you were asking, is that going to be a new line item in the budget?
And there's advantages and disadvantages to calling that out
Mhm.
as a line item, which is, it's out there and everyone can see that we're doing it, but also it's out there.
No, exactly. I'm already like, the Facebook, like someone's gonna be like, can you believe
Well,
this?
we can eliminate that, because now
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all line item.
Yeah, right.
But also it is important that it infuses everything.
Yeah.
That it informs everything
so how
too.
you-
So it,
So I think both.
Well, that's what I said,
Yeah.
maybe both, I don't know.
That-
I say we let the staff figure it out.
Yeah.
We just tell them that they did a great job.
Well, again, I mean, look, when you read this month's report, tell me what you think. I mean, there's a ton there
Yeah,
about the Anti-Racism Resource Challenge, and other things that the staff have been doing all year.
And one of the great things is it's going to be very challenging for them to pull that number and figure out what part. Because
Right.
the staff has done a really great job of integrating it into everything, so.
Listen, these managers, no,
which is how it really.
these managers are brilliant at figuring this out and managing. I mean, the more trust and authority we give them to manage these things, the better they do.
so can I ask, sort of relatedly, do the other directors have budgets? Have specific budgets? So the managers of programs do, but they.
Yeah, so, right, so Jody Colo, Director of Communications, she is the one primarily, and her team are the one primarily determining how the, again, the roughly $50,000 a year we spend on marketing and communications. Jeremy Andrzejowski is instrumental in determining how we're going to spend whatever money we've determined we're going to spend on facilities upgrades. Elizabeth and technology, Lori and public programs, Lee and collections, right? But again, they are responsible for, with their managers, managing how much money there is budgeted for those things, but the leadership team is always talking about those things together. So when we're trying to figure out what the priorities are going to be and how the monies are going to get allocated, the directors are making those determinations together at the table. And then each one of them with their managers is then responsible for the actual administration. How are we physically spending this money?
Okay. So I realized that I wanted to make clear why I was asking was
Yeah.
because as the director, this new anti-racist director and equity director sort of steps into, and I was wondering like if their place at the table will be comparable,
Yes.
so, I would, for somebody to feel like, wait, I thought this was an empowering sort of position,
Right, no.
but it seems like everybody else has a budget and I have to like ask for monies from, so
It
that,
might be like,
that's why I was asking.
maybe
got
the programming money is coming from, the programming. and
Right.
Their budget is more, where are we sending this person? Are we sending them to a national conference? Are we doing something else with this new position? And that's where the budgeting goes, because programming is already covered elsewhere.
Right. And it seems like, but it's not just covered in one particular,
Right.
other, like directors have a.
Right, I mean, we're
That's what I
trying,
was-
exactly, you see, we're trying to, I think we've worked very hard at, and that's why I say at some point, I don't think, we're gonna want to continue to have essentially two strategic plans, right? We're not gonna want to have the strategic plan, so to speak, here and the anti-racism strategic plan over here. We want at some point to know that these priorities have been assumed within everything that we're doing. So, right, is it that we have a director of equity and anti-racism, and the director of equity and anti-racism has this budget and this is the money that they're responsible for, or we have a director of equity and anti-racism, and that director with the leadership team is helping us to be even more intentional making sure, how is all of the money we're spending on collections aligned with anti-racist principles? How is the money we're spending on technology aligned like that? How is the money we're spending on programs aligned like that? That's the way I think about it.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate it. Again, as a professor, I'm thinking about a sort of corollary conversation that we have, that I bring up with my students, which is that, is it better for a department to, let's say, have a class on African-American literature, or is it better for the department to, in every American literature class, to have like, thoughtful representation of African-American writers? And my answer is both, because we're not, yeah, it's always my answer. But because we're not at the place where like where we don't need that concerted effort, like we're right, but at the same time we need to be doing. So these are the questions that so it seems that what you're explaining to me, or what I'm understanding, is that the culture of conversation among the leadership team is already one in which you collaborate over the various pockets of money.
Absolutely.
So that is the culture that the new director would be stepping in.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you explaining.
In a library budget, you might have a gift for Judaica. And so that person knows, okay, I've got $50,000 that I can spend on Judaica.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm going to spend it for. Or does that come out of the social sciences bigger budget? No, we've got this special gift. That's the question I think we're asking.
Yeah.
Does this person have discretion, or does this person have to go to the leadership team and say, you're really not thinking about this when you're thinking about your children's literature budget?
Yeah.
No, I think to your point, the answer is yes. And I don't think we're gonna know exactly how it works until we have that person and we have it in place. How it works on day one, that's not how it's gonna look 5 years from now.
Yeah.
The point is to make sure that that's still looks like 5 years from now.
Right.
Can I ask a question? Are you guys at a pause point on this?
Yep.
One thing, and I know, David, I think it's helpful for us, especially for board members who've, kind of seen Billy's drafts of the changes to the wage scale over time.
Yep.
There were some materials that I think might be beneficial to the broader board. If we could look maybe historically at documentation that he provided with us a couple of sessions ago, as we really in earnest started to make these adjustments, frankly, even before we were informed by the anti-racism work.
Mhm.
I think seeing that curvature and really understanding kind of where are we along the commitment we laid out 2 years ago, and also to understand, I think, to some of the points Virginia has made around, really giving a lot of credence to the advisory committee around that being a foundational anti-racism need that we have to be very bold about that. And I think as we talk to community members, I definitely have not gotten pushback when I've told them we expect our employees to be paid equitably and commensurate with the work that they're performing. And no one questions that strategy, at least in my experience so far. But I think it's hard for people to understand when they just see a line item that looks like it keeps creeping without that deeper context. And if that's, I know it may be quick for Tuesday, but maybe if for the board packet for August, we might have some time to really dig in on that piece, because I think that does really arm us more effectively about the single largest line item we carry. And gives us, I think, the right fact points to really hone in on and stay consistent as we communicate in the community.
For sure. No, that's absolutely our intention, Sarah. That's, again, when we
Perfect. Thank you. That's all. I just wasn't sure if that kind of deeper
it is.
was something we wanted to address.
When we start in earnest on the budget in August, again, we do those two big things. We talk about revenue and we talk about expenditure for people. And Billy will be ready in August to show you all of those graphs of, what does our work towards salary and wage equity actually look like in terms of the real salaries and the objectives we have about making sure that people in all of the categories are paid equitably, that we're paying a living wage, that we're trying to bring more people to the midpoint of their ranges, that we're trying to make more opportunities, and this is also a big part of it that we haven't really touched on yet. That's been a part of our strategy is creating more opportunities for full-time employment and more opportunities for benefits for part-time employment. I mean, those kinds of objectives have a big impact on how much we're paying for the people part of our budget. So it's, it's not just the salaries and wages, but it's, again, one of the biggest things that we've heard in terms of equitable compensation is making sure that more people have access to the benefits that really matter to them, like health insurance, for instance.
And can I bring up one additional point before I
Yeah.
lose the thought? One thing that's been really important to me is I've been having a lot of community conversations around how do we change the composition of our workforce, and how do we really intentionally think about what pipeline looks like. I'd like to, and I don't know where this may fit in the strategic plan, but I mean, I think one conversation point we've continued to hear was, people who, may look like a lot of our patrons don't come into this field. And I think that if we can find through our part-time employment a strategy around paid teen positions that are really targeted to youth in the community that, can help us learn from, the communities that they're representing, and really can, and I think help us shape the programs we're building. I'd love to figure out a way, and I know, again, like, not to pile on and add more costs, but I think if we say that is a value to us, but we don't keep hiring those kids, I feel like we're not going to continue to drive access to the field. I'm sorry, I have a visitor.
No, that's fine. Hello.
Hello. Mom, hold on a second, buddy.
I noticed that we have 10 comments in the chat. Does that?
Oh, I've looked at them. Yeah, it's all, most of those were from Sarah. David, can you talk more into the mic? I can't hear you, really muffled.
So I think that screen is from the computer up there.
It is, yeah, that's why.
So
My apologies. My son is home, and he apparently unintentionally let my dog out.
Oh,
And
Oh,
he's now freaking out. I'll be right back.
Go.
I'll be going to catch a dog. I'll be right back.
Oh, mercy. Okay.
Is that something that Stephen Jackson is working on, or that we can have him work with Billy on? Engaging?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, yeah, Stephen, talks a lot about, and has done a great deal of work on re-engaging with teen groups. I know that, I think Stephen would love to find ways to compensate some of these teens for some of the work that they're helping him do, like figuring out, for instance, how they want their space to look and other things. Yeah. And in fact, some of the money that we're getting from this latest grant that we're calling a Library for All, some of that money Stephen himself is going to be spending to engage teen artists to do a mural, and so those teens will be benefiting from some of those funds directly too.
Again, that's something that, when we're talking about budgeting for equity, anti-racism.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, that teen space is going to serve teens that fall into that.
Right. That's what it's meant for.
And so I like the idea of us using them as the avenue to try to find some teams that are already in the space.
Mhm. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm sorry. Is this I'm realizing a little late in the game
No.
that I don't know if this is an appropriate place for me to play catch up on policies that already exist.
I don't see why not.
But I'm wondering, when it comes to wage equity, if benefits are part of that and have been part of those conversations. So for instance, I just realized in another context that like when you have people who are paying this, say they're getting benefits at the same rate or whatever, but they're paying into it the same amount, of course, that's deeply unequal, so that somebody who's making like $150,000 and is paying the same, literally the same amount for a benefit, paying their contributions to their benefits
Right.
versus somebody who's making like $40,000 or $35,000, obviously that's unequal. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
literally it's the same, but obviously as a percentage of their salary, like you can have people who are paying like 8 to 10% of their salary for, versus people who are paying like 2% of the salary. And I'm wondering if that's come up in these conversations or. if there's a-
In precisely the way you're asking, I'm not sure that it has, and I would encourage you to remember that question, and let's ask it again, or I'll ask it of him directly when Billy is around, our Director of Human Resources. Because what I'm thinking, if I'm understanding your question correctly, what I'm thinking is that some of that might be tied to not just decisions that we make, but decisions that might be out of our hands regarding, for instance, the health insurance consortia that we belong to, and how we manage so, in other words, there's a certain percentage that we've determined that the library is going to pay for the staff that are eligible for health insurance, and then how much the individual staff member will have to pay depending on the kind of plan that they've chosen.
Right.
And so then how much of those decisions are ours to make alone regarding, should the percentage, if it's a certain percentage, should that percentage be the same for me as the executive director and for for a librarian in the adult services department when our salaries are vastly different.
Right.
I think that
That's exactly right.
And so I'm not sure.
I was even asking about something that's even more unequal when it's not even a percentage,
Yeah.
but it's a flat amount that everybody, do you know what I mean?
So I don't know that we have any, I think they're all
Like our
percentages.
healthcare premiums are $50 a month or whatever.
Yeah, right.
No.
So I think everybody's healthcare is like,
Yeah.
that would be great,
Very likely
by the way.
that That's outside of our control, but there are things within our control, things like defined benefit contribution plans, which
Yes.
Yeah.
very few employers offer, and I actually do not know the answer to that question. Do we have a defined benefit contribution?
Yes.
So there's.
All in and optional, obviously, you can
Yeah,
choose to
right.
participate or not.
What we are, yeah,
Yeah.
and how we are encouraging employees, how we're articulating to our employees this benefit and how important it is and impactful it is, and there is a lot of work that can be done there.
I think previous conversations have been more about how can we get medical access or those benefit access to more people.
Sure.
I think that was the first step. I like that you're now thinking about, okay, we're giving it to more people.
Well, I don't even know if that conversation, I'm back again to my refrain of both, I don't know that conversation is over or that we've gone where exactly.
That's very much a part of this people line going from, 6.4 to 7.5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
right.
do we make part-times full-time? How do we make sure everybody has equal? Do we have a dog?
Okay.
Excellent.
We're making sure that everybody has, at least access to.
Yeah, sure,
You know,
yeah.
I mean-
I don't think that we can fully then on, okay, well, now everybody has access to it. We do have access to it. I think that's the next part.
So
Yeah.
Colleen was just asking about defined benefit. So the primary defined benefit program that we have is IMRF, the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, right? And again, the employer contribution to that is the highest contribution, but then every staff member that's a part of IMRF then has a monthly contribution that they also have to make to the plan. And all of that is defined by the IMRF organization. As we have worked and continue to work to making more of our positions such that they're eligible for IMRF participation, because not every staff member is a member of IMRF. There's an hourly, standard and everything else. But as we work to make more of them, then obviously to the organization, the cost increases because the organization is required to pay more to have more of our employees a part of that. But that's the primary defined benefit plan. It's a pension plan that once you are, what's the word? Vested, thank you. That you have that pension for life. So.
Yeah.
And I would say that for those who are, I believe IMRF is the most fiscally stable,
Solvent.
and solvent
Yes, it
of
is.
the public pension
It is.
programs in the state.
And you know why?
because the law does not allow us to skip payments.
And because the state has no control
Yes,
over it. That's my point.
that's your, yeah. Well, yeah.
You're saying Blagojevich never got anywhere close.
No.
to-
Well, I'd say like, part of the issue with the village is that their position with their pensions is that they were allowed to skip payments some years.
Right.
And so now they have to catch up. IMRF does not allow that.
That's right.
So.
That's right.
So we've never had the ability to say, well, we'll skip this year and catch up 5 years later when another board has it.
I mean, right. So, I mean, even, and this is just like a minute point, but I want to make it anyway. I mean, it's why, it's one of the only things that are, other than the levy, that still connects us directly to the village. The village of Oak Park, by law, by IMRF rule, must be the library's authorized agent for the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. IMRF won't allow us to do that for ourselves. And the reason is because the library does not have the authority to levy its own tax. And IMRF will not allow you to be your own authorized agent unless you can levy a tax, because they need to know that they are going to be able to get that money. And if you can't levy your own tax, then they're not gonna, then you can't do this. The village has to do that. That's how they make sure that they always have the funds that they need to continue paying their pensions.
So
Anyway.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the beginning of kind of this pay equity. From when I was researching it, it looked like there was, and I can't remember what the year was, maybe 2016 or something, there was a point when there was a significant cut to the budget by a board, or did I?
No, there
imagine
was, there were.
A levy reduction because I believe some of the payments we had been making to the bonds for the construction were expiring.
Okay,
And so what happened was we rolled a portion of that revenue into our operating budget but let the
Most of it
bulk
was
of it
retired.
expire,
Yeah.
so that the levy on the whole went down. So there was not an operational budget cut, but there was a levy reduction.
okay, thanks.
So
That
between,
didn't cause the salary inequity, it just existed.
no,
It
no.
did, it existed, and I think one of
Okay.
the things that as we look at this, and you'll see some of the charts for it is, and it took me a few times of talking with Billy and David about it, was that the quartiles that are broken down is not quartiles within our internal, if I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, or it's not part of like our internal like distribution of salaries across the organization, as it is like a staff member being in that quartile versus the industry, like libraries in general in their area.
In other words,
Right.
what Billy does every year is he does a market analysis. He wants to be sure that all of our own organizational priorities aside, he wants to know that staff members are being compensated in a way that is commensurate or comparable to the other positions within the market. So he does that every year, and that's a part of the calculations that he does, and then a part of the recommendation that he makes for what, if any, increases, a staff member should receive. So he compares positions across the market to others and says, okay, well, this person's position is comparable to these 5 in other organizations, and what do the salaries look like? How aligned are they? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I think he told me once, it was like, we can have a director and a shelver both be in the top quartile as we're looking in the overall quartiles, even though their salaries internally
different, yeah.
are hugely different,
Right.
but because of where they are relationally to staff in other libraries, they are in the top quartile.
Right. So it's not how are they being paid compared to other staff in the organization in other categories, but how are they being paid comparable to thousands of other people who have similar positions in other organizations. But again, at the same time, again, the organization has its own priorities, such as, we decided that we were going to get every staff member, no matter what they did, to at least $15 an hour. And so we did, regardless of what the market said about those positions. Even if the market said, these people in this kind of a position are not making that salary, well, we decided that's okay. we're not going to pay anybody less than $15 an hour. You know, and then of course, minimum wage laws also come into play there.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And I apologize for the run out, and I know I may have missed things in the moments I was away. Have we touched at all about, as we're talking about facilities and some of the initiatives, we had, I think, such a significant commitment pre-COVID around some of the sustainability priorities of the team and the sustainability priorities for the facility. And I know that that is still kind of accounted for in the strategic plan, but what I feel like as we paused some of the broader facility conversations, you know, I may have lost the thread, frankly, on where we are
No,
with
I
some
mean,
of those sustainability priorities.
yeah, today we haven't talked about that yet, but I'm glad you asked, because Jeremy and I also had this conversation a few days ago. And he said, you know, I'll be interested, you know, he said, I understand that maybe the commitment that we've been having to ecological sustainability and other things may not end up being as high a priority, let's say, as wage and salary equity, but at some point I'll want to know how high of a priority is that for the board. You know, like for instance, we just completed this very significant upgrade of all of our lighting here to LED. So I don't know if you notice how much better the lighting is in here. And that was a significant investment. And there are other things that we've been doing every year to continue to make that progress on that sustainability stewardship objective. But, you know, and there are other things that we would like to do, and we can put them into that part of the budget. But again, if other things end up being a higher priority and we need to decide we're going to spend the money in different ways, then, you know, well, we have to maybe sort of postpone some of those priorities. But yes, we're thinking about that as well. And how much of that do we, you know, how much of that is going to continue to be a priority? So I know that will be a part of the conversation that Jeremy will be very interested in hearing.
Sarah, are you asking us right now?
I am. I'm just kind of, as you know, as the board's thinking about our positions and what we value, you know, one thing in a lot of conversations I've been having with community leaders in issues around anti-racism are also, you know, very tightly tied to environmental social justice concerns for neighboring, you know, maybe not Oak Park directly, but neighboring communities, and the decisions we're making around sustainability, while in kind of the short term may be nice to do, they're becoming less and less a nice to do and more a need to do, kind of for our broader responsibility in the position we have in the community. So I just kind of wanted to feel out what the board's thoughts were on sustainability and kind of how much we want to advocate for that being an ongoing budgeting priority as other department leaders are kind of being asked to review their budgets, and how we want to keep that in the framework of what we're focused on. I'm also being very frank, I spent 4 hours at a Don Harmon community meeting, and like 90% of it was on the current energy legislation. So our fellow Oak Park residents seem to think it's the only thing they want to talk about right now, at least with our state leadership. So I just kind of wanted to hear the composition of the board's perspective on it.
And with IGOV, Sarah, because as you guys will recall, IGOV is, you have prioritizing sustainability as our, you know, 2021 discussion.
What's the rest of the board think? As you think about our sustainability priorities, do you think of them kind of dovetailing into some of the anti-racism work? Do we think of that kind of separate and distinct? Is that something we want to keep the team really focused on, or do we feel like we have other things you want to prioritize over that?
Personally, I've always kind of thought of them as kind of separate from our public services. I've always, like, as we look here between the difference between support services and public, and, you know, the public services, I've always, I guess, in, you know, in my mind, it's always kind of fallen more to the back of house, like the that support service administrative side than the public service programming side. But and I don't think that it doesn't have to be that way, but that's just the way, when I think about the sustainability things, that's kind of what I think of as of that piece, is like our capital expenditures are, you know, and other operational administrative, work.
I always felt like it was kind of under facilities management, like, are we gonna upgrade this thing? Are we gonna,
Mhm.
it never felt like it was, like, I know it's part of how the public interacts with us, especially is, like seeing the Beautiful Butterfly and, seeing some of those projects, knowing that, to bring needs, all of us. But like, I never really thought of it as like a forward-facing programming thing. I felt like it was a facilities-based addendum outreach to the public that didn't really interface with them in the same way as our other.
When Jim Madigan was here, we almost every month, there would be at least a comment about when we change the light bulbs or whatever, this is going to be a real savings. And I think that was something I heard more 2 years ago than I hear now.
I think to your point, Virginia, about like not thinking about this as a public facing, I would like to see it become a public facing document that we can just hold out to the community and say, this is the library's sustainability plan and here's what we're doing. If that's something that the board would prioritize, 1, 2, if we think that there's enough content there to be able to, like, changing the light bulbs, okay, but like, what are we doing to make sure that we're good stewards moving forward? And there are bills and the other taxing bodies are looking at this. Again, this is not that I got for one of our priorities for 2021. And I would love to be able to say that the library has a sustainability plan. What are some of the other things that the other taxing bodies are talking about when they talk about their sustainability? It's largely being driven currently by the village board and Susan Buchanan, who is like desperately trying to get the village to think strategically about how we prioritize sustainability. But I would say that the park district has been a large player in this
Yeah,
as well.
I would agree with that. They're a real leader.
They are aggressively
Yes.
pursuing sustainability.
Yes.
So, and
We have a village trustee on the line who just raised their hand, which may be about this or maybe something else.
oh, hey, Judy. Where'd he go?
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, wait. I lost my train of thought. What was the last thing you were talking about before you switched to this point in sustainability?
We're talking about wages.
No, but still with sustainability. I think
The village's over commitment to sustainability goals.
Yeah, I really, when I was thinking about the subject, I think we all try to figure out what our role is and how we can help within this scope of these different boards to drive sustainability. And I think with the library, there's the real overarching, fact that you all can play with the education standpoint, which is really lackluster to just the layman, the regular person, and also to our communities of Black and Brown communities, and also the apartment renters. We know that there is just a lack of getting that education and knowing what we can do to stop or help to slow down the effects of global warming, climate change. So I think that that's a huge part that the library could get involved in when you think about those efforts, but also, how intentional do you all want to be? And it seems that there is, funding is always going to be one of those, things that will slow down those efforts. And I think we're lucky at the village level when we're getting those sustainability dollars through, composting and things of that nature. So some of the money that we have there, I think, is going to, really influence what the village does on a larger scale. But I think everybody has their part to play, and all of these boards have a specific role they can play.
So I'll ask this, both GDK and Colleen, do you see our piece of this being more doing the things we're already doing to set an example, but then adding, I guess, sustainability specific programming and education. Okay.
And coming up with a plan, I mean, I would put it to our staff to come to us and say, these are, these are areas that are ripe for us to explore and. Yeah.
All right. Where else do you want to go today? The time that we have left. Other questions you want to talk about, other issues? Again, what I would say is that we should have plenty of time. The agenda for next Tuesday is fairly light, and you'll have a presentation at the beginning of the meeting on last year's financial audit, which is now finished. So there'll be that presentation, which probably shouldn't take more than 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes, depending on the questions that you've got. And after the reports, there's just really one other item of business to adopt one policy that we're required now by the state legislatures to adopt. I do have on the agenda the closed session again to go over closed session minutes, which we didn't do last month. But other than those things, the rest of the time really is I put on the agenda just to continue this conversation, to prepare for the meaty budget conversations that we'll start having in August.
Are there things that you feel we did not cover today that you want to laser in on Tuesday?
Well, I guess the only thing, and so yes, I think that on Tuesday, let's ask some of the additional questions that you might have when Jeremy and Billy and other staff members are in the room. If you want to ask more questions about sustainability, for instance, or if you'd like to ask some more questions about what we've been doing for the last couple of years on wage equity. But I guess other than that, I guess what I would really like to hear again more about that we haven't really specifically touched on is knowing that the majority of our funds to operate come from local real estate taxes. What is the board's, stomach going to be for any increases in that levy in the coming fiscal year? Because whatever that is, if any, is going to inform a lot of what we can do and not do, or will tell me how we're going to need to shift our thinking about how we're expending our funds. So in other words, I'll just give you an example that I don't think is going to actually materialize, but just to illustrate what I'm saying. If you say that wage and salary equity, yes, still a priority, yes. We want to continue on the trajectory that we're on. We want to continue making progress on this. So show us what that's going to cost, but that's what we want to do. And at the same time, you say, however, we don't want to see any increase in our levy for next year. Okay, well, that's very informative, because that means that we are going to have to find that money somewhere else. Right? So that's what I'm saying.
Have that question answered on Tuesday.
Not official,
Well,
not,
a good sense.
yes.
So that as you are preparing the budget for our review, you have
Right.
much better.
So in other words, right, so that in August, I don't come to you with a revenue projection that is wildly outside of the realm of possibility. Right. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Again, it's not doesn't have to be final, because, again, and this is how it's worked every year for the last several years. We every month we have the conversation and we look at it again, and we sort of, come to consensus on what we're going to, feel comfortable with. That's how I imagine it continuing to play out.
So I have two questions. One is, who were in the board packet I haven't looked at yet? Is there a list of who else will be joining us, like from the leadership team?
No, but generally speaking, most of the team comes to the meetings unless there's some reason they can't, or if there doesn't appear to be anything on the agenda that they necessarily have to address, often they won't. In other words, what I tell them is, you are not the only person who's obligated to be there is me. You are not obligated to be there. But Jeremy almost always comes. Billy almost always comes. But if I say to them, look, this is the conversation we're having, we need to have you there, then they'll come.
Okay, so
So
Billy,
I-
you said is HR, or Jeremy, I know.
Jeremy's operations and Billy is human resources. And Jody is communications.
Okay.
Elizabeth is technology, Lee is collections, Lori is public programs and services, and Rob Simmons is social services and public safety.
I have two questions, one for Ika. And pardon?
We haven't met in some time.
Really?
That was not my question. In a recent election, there was a non-binding referendum for cooperation among the taxing bodies. And I don't know, I cannot answer to anybody who asks me about this. What has the library done with this? Because our answer has been pretty clear that we're not going to worry about that because there's really nothing we can do. And is that kind of where we are? Okay, and since we've got a smiling face there from the village board.
We haven't discussed it, I got, because largely we should get that, but I will bring it to them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And the other is in looking for this new director for our anti-racism strategic plan, what is the timeline? We've got, I think the application deadline will close at the end of the month.
No, it's already closed.
Okay.
It's already closed. So we had
So it's closed.
had the 80
80
applicants.
candidates.
We've narrowed it
Then
down to
the
10
committee will
people.
look at those,
Right.
and then at what point does the board look at applicants or?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. Does this board as such want to be a part of that conversation or that process? Because traditionally, the board is not a part of
That's
that
right. And it
process.
doesn't seem to me, I mean, don't-
Again, right now, the plan is, and this can change, but right now, the plan is that there will be, we haven't put them together yet, but there will be groups of staff teams that will meet with candidates, maybe not all 10 of these, but a subset. The leadership team certainly will. The anti-racism advisory team certainly will. So there will be different groups at different points that will meet with candidates and have an opportunity to speak with them, to ask questions, and then to tell me essentially what they think and you know who they think really is the most appropriate person for the job. I didn't plan for, again, the board as a body to do that because traditionally the board doesn't do that. You don't get involved in hiring decisions. Tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, are we comfortable with not directly intervening?
I guess, well, I kind of sit in a weird spot.
Well, you're going to be on the anti-racism advisory team, so.
What I would ask, if it's possible, can we get like blind copies of their resumes? Not because the who is important, but like I don't know. I've stalked just about everybody at the library on LinkedIn. I know that much about them, but I'd like to know like what kind of background do these people come in with? What kind of, where have they been? What are they doing? Not specifically for that person, but I think that's going to sort of form in my head what we think that person's going to be able to do as a director.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean,
Or do we have like a list of like what was the list of qualifications that got us from 80 to 10? I just want to know what that is.
I'm also curious for maybe a different reason, how you got from 80 to 10.
well, okay. So yeah. So I mean, there was a. So I mean, very generally, there was a position description. The requirements that we were asking people to meet were quite general, and that really was because of the conversations that we had with Rashida and RGW. So you know, it was again among a few other things to be able to demonstrate at least 7 years of professional or lived experience doing this kind of work, and so. When we were trying to go from 80 to 10, we were really just looking at that within the resume. So first of all, does that person have at least the few things that we're saying they need to have, and how strongly do they communicate that through their resume? And then after that, reading their cover letters how well do they articulate their understanding of the work that the library is doing and what they're coming into and why they want to be a part of that. So in other words, these 10 people, to one degree or another, really did an outstanding job through that communication of telling us why this position at the Oak Park Public Library was something they wanted to do, rather than reading a cover letter and realizing that that cover letter could probably be used to apply for any number of positions, right? So there was nothing there that indicated that they really understood what it was about this organization that attracted them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it was, do they at least have the 7 years and a few other things that we said in the job description, and then, how well did they act? So that's how we got to the.
Did you get letters from out in right field where they just said, and I think this position at the University of Rochester is perfect for you.
No, that we didn't. I don't think we got that. I don't think we got that. But yeah. So I mean, again, some people.
Because this is a new position, like, I kind of want to see, like I said, I don't care about that, like, I don't want to see that too, but I want to see like what qualifications came to us that got us from that 80 to 10.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, well, okay. I can. Let me think about that. How I will do
I don't
that.
know how that would be, and like I said, like, I know I'm kind of cheating.
Well, and so at any point, so like whatever group of staff members, for instance, are going to meet some of these candidates, right? So again, the next step is Rashida is working with Billy and I, and we're going to have these several questions that we're going to ask each of these 10 candidates. And we're going to ask them to reply to those questions either in writing or by creating a voice, by just doing it orally. And then we're going to listen to or read those responses and then figure out how many of the 10 we want to then bring to these groups of staff members and the advisory team. I don't know how many that will be, 5 people, 3 people, whatever it is. And then at that point, any group of staff or the advisory team who will be sitting down with those people, you will see their full resume, their full cover letter, all the things that they submitted to us so that you can inform your conversation with them. But so that was the way I was thinking about, this is the way we've typically done it. But if you're saying before that you would like to see more information, let's say about these 10 people, I can figure that out.
And somebody else can be like, it's a new position. Usually when you're hiring a position, you have a previous person, like you
we
have
don't,
a benchmark.
right.
We're looking for somebody who's kind of like this, but these are the things that an ideal candidate, like, we're just going in blind.
Yeah.
I don't think that we as a board should, like you said, have any part of the hiring and firing. I just want to know a little bit more about, from our goals, from our perspectives, as we've narrowed down what we want. What were some of the criteria? What were some of the sentences? What were some of the things that these people said?
Okay.
Because
Well, let me talk to Billy and figure that
I
out.
agree with Virginia, that would really help me as we think strategically about how we want the library to go forward, to read these 10 wonderful ideas that these people have. That would really help.
I would probably, I'll talk with Billy about the best way to do that and see what he thinks. I think he's going to be a little anxious about it, but we'll figure that out. And I think that if I were to do that, we would probably take out any identifying information. We'll just give you the content.
And I would like to say, I want to reiterate something that Virginia said, which is that new as I am to this board, I do not think it's the board. I don't want to be part of the hiring process at all. Okay. So I'm even wondering if we need to see, like, Virginia is going to be able to look at the full information as it becomes relevant to her discussions and her job on the advisory board, or her job, but, and I don't know if what we're asking for, what Ted has mentioned and what Virginia has mentioned, needs to happen before the position is finalized, like before do you know what I mean? Like, if it's about generally what attracted or who was attracted to this position in terms of profiles, not specific people. I don't even know that would we need to see that before they're actually hired. Like, if we're not actually commenting on the hiring at all, right? So if we like afterwards, if we wanted to
Yeah.
see, you know,
I don't
like.
care if it was after we hired a person and then you said, and here are the 9 other people, I want to know. What did we put
Yeah,
out
right.
there in the world? And
Oh,
what did we
well, I
get
mean-
back?
So in case
Oh,
that helps
oh.
with Billy's anxiety.
So have you seen the?
Yeah.
As the board, I think that's going to, and it may not drive how when we're looking at these 2 different strategic plans, what we can get that strategic platform to do might be partially dependent on the kind of person we have.
Oh, yeah, of course. That goes without saying, I think, but
So what kinds of things can we, as we're looking at 2 strategic plans that will eventually become 1 plan, what things, when we look at, this person may not be able to meet all things that we want on that list. They might not have all of the criteria, they may not have all of the know-how. But what things do they have that we can now say, yes, we want to shift that to be more primarily part of this framework before we have an integrated framework versus, we don't know that person has that skill set. We want to keep that over here. And also, I kind of want to see, when we go, less efficient, but when we go looking for somebody for this job where you can't look and see who was the previous person who was there, what did we get back? What are we putting out in the world, and what people are responding to what we're asking? Because I think from a strategic plan, when we're looking at balance and equity within our own walls, that's going to show us very tangibly. We are going out and asking for that in equity and anti-racism. In the way that we put that out into the world, what did we get back as a response? And are we happy with how people responded to that?
well, did you all did you read the job advertisement that we put out?
I
Okay,
did, but it's
so you-
gone now, right?
We pulled it down, but I mean, obviously I still have it. All right, so you read it. So I mean, I guess what I would say is, these 10 people generally responded amazingly well to what, I mean, that's why they're the 10 people, right? I mean, they told us exactly what we wanted, what we asked to know about the work that they're doing, the kinds of experiences that they've had, the lives that they've lived. I mean, that's why they're among the 10 people we want to continue a conversation.
And Colleen, to your point, if you're like, I don't think this is necessary,
I
totally
just, I
okay
don't
with you being like,
follow.
I don't think this is necessary.
I don't follow, and I feel a little uncomfortable as a board asking for that.
Well,
kind of-
Again,
I mean,
it's not something the board typically does.
And well, I personally, I don't know what I would learn from that would inform my decision-making as a trustee. And so, and I also trust you and that you are embedded in this process and that I don't need to be a part of like looking at, you're gonna get the whole wealth of information and monitoring stuff. So I personally don't know
Okay.
what we as a board, as an institution would learn from having
And
that.
honestly, I could be conflating the 2 in my head, because in my head, there's not a lot separating my position there, representing us as a board,
Yeah,
and being on the board.
I also want to place our trust in you to select a candidate that then we can talk to about what we put out into the world and what they're going to give to us.
Yeah.
That the other 9 candidates, that's not going to be a loss or
Yeah.
about, right?
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, let me be clear, in case it isn't. So, when the staff teams meet with the candidates and tell me what they think, and when the leadership team meets and tells me what they think, and when the advisory team meets and tells me what they think, I'm going to take all of that into consideration. The final decision is going to be mine.
Yeah.
The final decision will be mine. I will take all of that and say, okay, knowing all of that, this is the person we want.
I also trust that you have been listening to the board for the last 2+ years and what our priorities are.
Yes.
That will inform that
Yes,
decision.
correct. Absolutely. You bet.
That's
Maybe it's not something that's necessary. I don't know a lot about organizations like ours seeking a person like this.
That's because a lot of them don't.
Exactly. A lot of them are doing it right now.
Yes, right.
And a lot of them are doing it wrong.
a lot of them are different.
So that's where, I mean, what matters to me is that it's not just one person. I mean, it is ultimately your decision, but that there is an advisory
Oh, yeah.
team.
Right.
And that there are
Right.
people whose lives are directly impacted.
Yeah. Right.
Part of that process that you're going through
Right.
that you'll be listening to.
I mean,
So
it's-
I like the
right.
fact that Virginia is on the advisory team,
Yeah.
I think means a lot.
And
It's
let
really
me,
important. and,
sure, let me say too, that, I say it's going to be my decision finally, primarily, not only because, but one of the main reasons that this person will be joining the leadership team. There are plenty of hiring decisions that happen in my organization all of the time that I don't make. The directors and the managers, they make them. I give them that authority to do that because they know what they need and want. And if they want to know what I think, they ask me and I tell them, but I'm not making those decisions for them. But this person is a director. They're joining the leadership team. So I'm going to listen to a lot of people, probably get a lot of different opinions and then make a decision.
So you're saying traditionally you don't look at the top 3 of this job or that job?
Not always. No, I don't. I really don't. Again, I have the best team I've worked with in my career. They know how to make these decisions and are making very good ones. So.
Well, then put my paranoia together.
No
And I'll
worries.
try to keep you guys proud. I'll sit.
All right.
Great.
I-
Like, that
I
really
just wanna-
matters to me that you're there.
I'm sorry. I just want to make one comment, and I think, Virginia, I appreciate everything you're sharing. I'm going through hiring 2 positions right now in my role professionally, and a lot of the processes that different people at this table probably have been a part of in hiring decisions, right, run the gamut from really great foundational, thoughtful approaches to hiring and ensuring you're aware of biases. And some of us have probably been in, one interview and gotten hired by somebody without a lot of insight, or hired someone, frankly, without all the insight of the pieces that you're talking about. So I think my thought, just as you're talking through the advisory committee's function in this process, is ensuring that we are using the power at that table to inform David and the leadership team of all of those insights they should be considering, that hopefully we always do in every hiring position at the library today. And if we don't, it shouldn't just be about this position, right? It should be about every position we're considering that will then help us secure and improve this framework we're building together. So I think the bigger thing for me is not uniquely about this role, but is about, like, should we be having deeper policy conversations about hiring practices at the library? And if that's something as a board we want to take up or listen to counsel from the advisory committee about, I think that would be really productive. I don't want to treat this like this one individual is a unicorn that's going to solve everyone's challenges, right? This is about us building a really strong leadership team that knows how to work this framework together. So I guess that was my only point. I love that we're thinking so intentionally about this role, but I want that to be for all of the roles, and creating an environment where everybody at the library, patrons included, feel like that's part of our process.
I appreciate that, Sarah. Thank you.
One thing I'm wondering is that some of the questions you asked us, Dave, about our
Yeah.
priorities, in terms of, is the approach to equity pay as the
Yeah.
primary expense
Yeah.
of its anti-racism work, or if not, what should be prioritized?
Yeah.
I think maybe if we, I don't know what, I didn't see that email till yesterday, because I hadn't even taken oath when it came through. But I'm just wondering if it makes sense to kind of run through that, because that does feel like it would inform the
Well,
choice. somewhat.
yeah, so I mean, I think we can continue that conversation on Tuesday for sure. I mean, so far, at least what I've heard is that you generally want that to continue to be a big priority. And so, yeah, I mean, my motivation in asking that question is, is it a priority? But if not, then what do you see as a higher priority? Well, it doesn't sound like you see anything necessarily as a higher priority. You have other priorities, perhaps environmental sustainability is one, perhaps figuring out the a new master facilities plan is another. But it doesn't sound, at least what I'm hearing, that for any of you, that there's anything necessarily a higher priority than the salary and wage equity piece. Is that accurate?
I guess my answer to that was kind of yes, and,
Yeah.
you know, and it goes to what we were talking about before,
Mhm.
which is like needing to kind of do the internal work and also at the appropriate
Right.
place,
Mhm.
kind of dovetail with things like learning, you know, so prioritize community-wide learning around anti-racism.
Sure.
And that, I think, you know, that can really tap into the Oak Park interest in community and learning and equity. You know, there's this craving that a lot of people, not all people, but a lot of people who move to Oak Park have.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to kind of tap into that.
Yeah.
I think is
Mhm.
a priority in addition to the equity pay, you know, the pay equity, I mean.
So on Tuesday,
And then also when you had talked about preserve and provide access to Oak Park's history in an article that I read, you know, looking at kind of Oak Park's history around racism and helping to do more education with Christian Harris.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
expand on that and really kind of, so I guess yes, the pay equity, but also make sure that we do have funding and priorities that when it's appropriate, in the next year, hopefully, we can really do some really robust programming.
right? Well, so, you know, when you read the strategic priorities report that's in this month's board packet, then I'll be interested if you want to share on Tuesday what you, because there's a lot in there about, you know, public programming and our equity anti-racist priorities. So I'd be interested to hear what you think about what you read there. You know, how well you think that's prioritizing that kind of learning. And I think it does. It's in the board packet that we emailed to you yesterday.
Okay.
Right. So all the reports are there. The one specific report is called the Strategic Priorities Report. It's a long report. I think it's about 6-7 pages. And there's a lot in there. So what that report does every month is it focuses on specific objectives and priorities from our strategic plan. And it gives you board information about what we're doing, the actions that we're taking, the impact or the effect that we're having. And so this month, the staff focused on a couple of engagement and learning priorities. And you'll see there that most of that is about some of the anti-racist programs and events that we've been having.
Okay,
So
great.
take a look at that. And then, you know, on Tuesday, let us know, the staff will be there. Let us know what you think of some of that.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Feeling good? All right. Okay, awesome. Well, great. So you want to finish out?
We have concluded our agenda. We stand adjourned.
12:32. Thank you all. Bye, Chibike. Bye, Sarah.
Hey guys, eat a donut for me.